Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was the reincarnation of the first Soul Reaper. The master of all Zanpakuto, Naruto x Rangaku Matsumoto, Bleach. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Soul's Awakening. The humidity was a physical weight. It clung to the back of the neck, slicked the palms, and made the very air in one's lungs feel heavy and secondhand. Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaves, was in the midst of a sweltering, unseasonable heatwave, one that had settled over the land of fire like a damp, suffocating blanket. It was the kind of heat that bred lethargy and short tempers, that made the cicadas buzz with a frantic, desperate energy from dawn until dusk. Yet, for a village that had been a crater less than a year ago, the complaints were blessedly mundane. The hiss of sweat was infinitely preferable to the hiss of a collapsing roof. At a stool in Ichiraku Ramen, Naruto Uzumaki swirled his chopsticks through the rich broth of his miso pork ramen. The steam mingling with the oppressive air. The familiar, savory scent was one of the few things that felt truly real to him lately, an anchor in a world that had subtly shifted its axis. He was a hero, the hero of Konoha. Children pointed at him in the streets, their eyes wide with awe, whispering his name. Villagers who once shot him looks of scorn now offered him free vegetables and deep, respectful bows. He had the village's acknowledgement, the very thing he had screamed for, fought for, bled for, his entire life. So why did it feel so hollow? Naruto, Earth to Naruto. He blinked, the image of 1,000 grateful, smiling faces dissolving from his mind's eye. Sakura Haruno was waving a hand in front of his face. Her green eyes narrowed with a familiar mix of concern and exasperation. On his other side, Sai sat with his typical placid, unreadable smile, his bowl of salt ramen already meticulously finished. Sorry, Naruto mumbled, offering a sheepish grin that felt like a poorly fitting mask. Just thinking. About what? Sakura asked, pushing a stray pink strand of hair from her forehead. You've been quiet all day. If this is about the bill, don't worry, it's my treat. Thank you, for saving my squad's collective bacon on the escort mission. It's not that, he said, and it wasn't. The mission had been trivial, a group of bandits who had Ndered the moment they realized who they were facing. It was hardly the stuff of legends. It's just quiet. Sai tilted his head, his smile unwavering. An absence of conflict is the goal of a shinobi, is it not? Peace is the desired state. According to one of my books on interpersonal dynamics, this is a time for celebration and relaxation. I know, Naruto sighed, pushing a slice of Narutomaki around his bowl. It just feels different. After the fight with Pain, everything was so clear. Protect everyone. Rebuild. Get stronger. Now, we've rebuilt. I'm stronger. And it feels like I am just waiting for the next horrible thing to happen. A shadow of understanding crossed Sakura's face. The fourth great ninja war was a looming storm cloud on the horizon, a promise of conflict that made this peaceful, sweltering afternoon feel fragile and temporary. But this wasn't just battlefield anxiety. This was something deeper in him, a strange lethargy of the soul. Ever since the confrontation with Nagato, the link to Kurama, the nine-tailed fox, had changed. The seething, malevolent presence that had been a constant furnace in his gut his entire life was now subdued, a grudging ally rather than a captive rage. The silence it left behind was deafening. He felt like a bell that had been unrung, a vast, empty space within him that used to be filled with incandescent fury. Maybe you just need a new goal, Sakura suggested gently. Becoming Hokage is still the plan, right? Of course it is, Naruto said, the words an automatic reflex. But even that dream felt distant, a destinate ion he was walking towards without truly feeling the ground beneath his feet. He was adrift. Before the conversation could delve deeper into his unnerving apathy, a familiar, languid voice cut through the humid air. There you are. I figured I'd find you three here. Kakashi Hatake stood at the entrance to the ramen stand, his single visible eye curving into a smile. He was in his full flak jacket and gear. A sign that this was not a social call. Sorry to interrupt your lunch. We've got a priority 3 assignment. Patrol duty on the eastern perimeter. Naruto straightened up instantly, the emptiness within him momentarily filled by the familiar call to action. A patrol. What's up? Another bandit problem. Unlikely, Kakashi said, his tone losing its casual edge. The sensor core has been picking up fluctuations. Minor, but erratic, like a stone being skipped across a pond. They can't pin it down. Lady Tsunade wants a set of experienced eyes to sweep the area. We head out in 10. The simple order was a relief. Thinking was a quagmire. Doing was solid ground. Naruto downed the rest of his ramen in 3 loud gulps, slamming the bowl down with a loud, "Thank you for the meal." Hat was more like his old self than anything he'd felt all day. The forest on the eastern edge of the Land of Fire was a wall of green, vibrant and teeming with life. Or, it should have been. As Team Kakashi moved through the dense undergrowth, an unsettling silence became more and more pronounced. There were no bird calls, no chittering of squirrels, no rustle of unseen creatures in the bushes. There was only the sound of their own footsteps on the damp earth and the incessant, maddening hum of the cicadas, which seemed to grow louder and more discordant the deeper they went. The air, already thick with humidity, grew heavy with something else. It was an electric, cloying pressure that felt like the air before a lightning strike, but one that never came. It made the hairs on Naruto's arm stand on end and a cold knot form in his stomach. Something's wrong, Sakura whispered, her hand resting subconsciously on the pouch of medical supplies at her waist. I've never felt the woods be this still. Sai, ever the artist, was observing the environment with a critical eye. He knelt, dipping a finger into a puddle of stagnant water. The ink in my scrolls feels sluggish, he noted, his voice low. It's as if the moisture in the air is interfering with the chakra infusion. It is unnatural. Kakashi held up a hand, bringing them to a halt. His visible eye was narrowed, scanning the canopy, the forest floor. The very air itself. His years of experience, his finely honed senses, were screaming at him that they were walking into a trap, but it was a trap of a kind he had never encountered. It had no sound, no scent of explosives, no glint of a hidden wire. It was a violation of the natural order. Stay sharp, he commanded, his voice a low growl. Whatever this is, it's not a standard shinobi technique. Naruto activated his sage mode, the orange pigmentation flaring around his eyes. The world snapped into a new dimension of sensory input. He could feel the life force of the trees, the faint pulse of insects hiding deep within the bark, the flow of natural energy all around them. But woven through it all was a terrifying anti-energy, a thread of pure, ravenous emptiness. That felt like a tear in the fabric of the world. It was a void, a hunger that radiated a spiritual coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. There, he said, pointing northeast. It's close. And it doesn't feel like chakra. It feels wrong. Like a hole that's trying to eat everything around it. They moved with renewed caution, kunai in hand. The pressure intensified with every step, becoming a palpable force that seemed to push against their skin. Then they heard it, a sound that did not belong in any forest, or any place of life. It was a high-pitched, grating shriek, like metal tearing, but overlaid with a chorus of pained, despairing whispers. They broke through a final line of ancient, weeping willows and froze. In a small clearing stood a creature that defied sanity. It was a vaguely humanoid mass of glistening black sludge, nearly 10 feet tall. Its limbs were disproportionate and constantly shifting, elongating and retracting like tormented amoeba. A slab of bone-white material was fused to its face. A crude, broken mask with a single, jagged eye-hole from which a malevolent red light pulsed. And in the center of its chest, where a heart should have been, was a perfectly circular, gaping hole that seemed to drink the very light from the air. In the creature's path, cowering against the trunk of a massive oak, was a man, a civilian woodcutter by his dress, his axe lying uselessly on the ground. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He wasn't screaming. He couldn't. The sound had been frozen in his lungs by the sheer wrongness of the thing before him. What in the world is that? Sakura breathed, her voice trembling slightly. Kakashi's eye was wide. It has no chakra signature. None at all. It's like it's not even there. The creature raised a glistening, tar-like arm. A set of bony claws extending from the tip. It paid the 4 powerful shinobi no mind whatsoever, its entire focus on the terrified, helpless soul before it. There was no time for a plan. "Sakura, get the civilian," Kakashi barked. "Sai, restrain it. Naruto, with me. We hit it with everything we've got." The team exploded into motion. Sakura blurred, appearing bees, eyed the woodcutter and hauling him back towards the safety of the trees. Sai's brush flew across his scroll. "Ninja art. Super beast scroll," he yelled. Two large, inky lions sprang from the parchment, roaring silently as they bounded towards the creature. The lions slammed into its form, but it was like hitting water. Their ink bodies were immediately corroded, dissolving with an audible hiss as if dipped in acid. The creature swatted one away, its claws tearing through the chakra-infused ink with contemptuous ease. "Rasengan!" Naruto roared, a swirling sphere of pure chakra grinding in his palm. He shot forward, slamming the attack directly into the creature's back. The impact was immense, gouging a huge chunk out of its torso and sending it stumbling forward. But there was no blood, no cry of pain. The black sludge simply flowed back together, sealing the wound in seconds as if it had never been there. The hole in its chest remained, inviolate. "It's not working," Naruto yelled in frustration. From above, Kakashi's voice rang out, "Lightning blade!" A screeching cacophony of 1,000 birds filled the clearing as Kakashi descended, his hand wreathed in a blinding torrent of lightning chakra. He drove his ultimate assassination jutsu deep into the creature's head. The lightning discharge lit up the clearing, incinerating leaves and scorching the ground. For a moment, the creature was completely enveloped in raw power. Then, the light faded. Kakashi was thrown back, landing lightly on a branch. The creature stood there, smoking, a massive hole blown through its masked HEA. A hole that was already beginning to writhe and seal itself. It let out another soul-rending shriek, this one filled with annoyance. It turned its attention from the fleeing woodcutter and fixed its single red eye on the shinobi who dared to interrupt its meal. "It regenerates too fast," Kakashi said, his voice grim. "And conventional attacks seem to be ineffective. It's like its body isn't entirely in our physical plane." The creature lunged, its speed belying its size. It charged not at Kakashi or Naruto, but at Sakura, who was still shielding the now sobbing civilian. Its instincts told it to go for the one protecting the weakest prey. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing for Naruto. He saw the trajectory. He saw the claws extending. He saw Sakura preparing a chakra-infused punch that he knew, instinctively, would do nothing. All his power, all his training, his sage mode, his Rasengan, the might of Kurama sleeping in his gut, none of it mattered against this thing. It was a problem whose solution he did not possess. And in that moment of absolute, frustrating impotence, something deep within him, something ancient and silent and forgotten, stirred. It was not a thought. It was not a voice. It was an instinct, purer and sharper than any he had ever known. It was the instinct of a key meeting its lock, of a predator seeing its natural prey. A whisper from the very marrow of his soul told him, with absolute certainty, what he had to do. He moved. He didn't use the body flicker technique. He didn't pour chakra to his feet. He simply was there. One moment he was 30 feet away. The next he stood directly between the monster and Sakura, his back to her, his arms slightly out to his sides. The world held its breath. The creature skidded to a halt, its single eye widening in what could only be described as confusion, and perhaps, for the first time, a flicker of fear. "Naruto, get back," Sakura screamed. "It's no use." But Naruto didn't move. His vision had changed. The world of color and light had been overlaid with a new spectrum. He could see the pulsating, corrupt soul of the creature, a tangled knot of hunger and despair. He could see the faint, shimmering soul of Sakura behind him. A bright pink flame of fierce determination. He could see the terrified, flickering candle flame of the woodcutter. And he could see the chains. A broken, dead chain dangling from the hole in the monster's chest, its chain of fate. The instinct guided him. He lifted his right hand, palm open, and gently, almost reverently, pressed it against the creature's bony mask. "What is he doing?" Kakashi muttered, poised to intervene. A brilliant, azure-white light erupted from Naruto's palm. It was not the crackling, violent energy of chakra. It was serene, pure, and utterly absolute. It was the light of absolution. The creature's body went rigid. The malevolent red glow in its eye faded, replaced by a look of profound, shocked peace. The discordant shriek softened into a long, drawn-out sigh of release. Most of its grotesque body dissolved, sublimating into countless particles of blue-white light, like fireflies taking flight into the dusk. It was a soul burial, performed with the unconscious perfection of a master calligrapher drawing a circle. But a part of it remained. A core of pure malice, the most condensed part of its being, refused to be purified. It was a shrieking, solidifying mass of black energy, lashing out. The instinct whispered again. A tool is needed. Naruto's left hand, which had been hanging at his side, clenched into a fist and then opened. Light, the same azure-white light of his palm, bled from his fingertips. It swirled, coalesced, and solidified with impossible speed. What took form in his hand was a sword. It was a katana of perfect, simple elegance. It had no extravagant tsuba, only a simple black rectangular guard. The hilt was wrapped in pristine white cloth. The blade itself was a marvel, unadorned and flawless, shimmering with an inner light. Its edge so keen it seemed to cut the very air it occupied. It was an asachi, an unnamed zanpakuto, but it was the archetypal ideal of one, a blade that felt more like a fundamental concept than a forged weapon. The weight in his hand felt more right than the Rasengan ever had. It felt like an extension of his soul that he never knew was missing. He swung. There was no sound, no clang of steel, no whisper of air. The blade passed through the remaining black mass, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a thin, perfect line of white light appeared where the blade had passed. The mass split in two and evaporated into nothingness, its last dying whisper one of gratitude. The sword in Naruto's hand held its form for another second, humming with a silent, clean power. Before it dissolved back into particles of light that were absorbed into his skin. The silence that descended upon the clearing was absolute. The oppressive pressure was gone. The cicadas, as if waking from a trance, slowly began their song again. The forest was alive once more. Naruto stood there, his blonde hair shadowing his eyes, his chest heaving. A wave of profound, bone-deep exhaustion washed over him, and he dropped to one knee, planting a hand on the ground to keep from collapsing entirely. Sakura, Kakashi, and Sai stared, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. The monstrous creature, the strange light, the impossible sword, none of it belonged in their world, in their understanding of power. And all of it had come from Naruto. In a dark, cluttered apartment filled with scrolls, wires, and the lingering scent of dango, Enko Mitarashi sat bolt upright on her couch, her hand clamped over the 3 tomo of the cursed seal on her neck. Usually, it was a source of constant, low-grade pain, a faint echo of Orochimaru's will that whispered vile things in the back of her mind. When she was stressed or her chakra was low, it would throb with agonizing heat. But a moment ago, something else had happened. A wave of energy had washed over the village, an energy so foreign and pure that her cursed seal had recoiled from it. But it hadn't been painful. For one glorious, unbelievable second, the seal had gone completely dormant. The pain vanished. The whispers ceased. The corrupting influence of Orochimaru's lingering chakra was utterly and completely silenced. Overwhelmed by a power that was its perfect antithesis. It was a moment of peace so profound, so absolute, she had almost forgotten what it felt like. Her own soul, for the first time in over a decade, had felt like her own. The feeling was gone as quickly as it came, the familiar dull ache returning. But it left behind a desperate, ravenous hope. Her dark eyes stared out the window in the direction of the eastern forest, a wild, calculating look on her face. Whatever that power was, whoever wielded it, she needed to find them. I don't know. For the 10th time, that was Naruto's only answer. He sat on a stool in the center of the Hokage's office, facing a grim-faced Tsunade. Kakashi stood by the window, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on his student. Shizune was present as well, her brow furrowed with worry. Don't know is not an acceptable answer, Naruto. Tsunade slammed her palm on her desk, rattling the stacks of paperwork. You manifested a weapon out of thin air that is not a known chakra construct. You used a technique that none of our sensors could even classify. It left no chakra residue. A creature that shrugged off a lightning blade in a raw, Sengen was dispatched by you with a touch and a swing of a sword you've never trained with in your life. I need more than, I don't know. Naruto ran a hand through his hair, his own frustration mounting. That's all I have. It was just instinct. I saw the thing, I saw it was going to hurt Sakura, and I just knew what to do. The feeling, the movements, it was all just there, in my head. Like remembering how to breathe. Tsunade slumped back in her chair, pinching the bridge of her nose. She had performed a full diagnostic scan on him. His chakra levels were depleted, but his coils were unharmed. There was, however, a strange, residual energy signature clinging to his very soul. It wasn't Kurama's malevolent red chakra, nor was it the calm green of natural energy. It was a deep, placid blue-white, an energy that felt impossibly ancient and powerful. And this sword? Kakashi asked, his voice quiet. What did it feel like? Naruto looked down at his empty hands, a phantom weight still lingering in his palm. It felt like me. More me than anything else. Like a part of me I'd forgotten I had. The room lapsed into a heavy silence, thick with unanswered questions. This was uncharted territory, a new form of power that wrote a giant, unnerving question mark over everything they knew. For now, this is classified at the highest level, Tsunade finally declared, her voice filled with authority. No one is to speak of what happened in that clearing. Kakashi, I want every scroll in the archives on spiritual energy, demons, and otherworldly summons pulled and analyzed. Shizune, BLE the sensor patrols on all perimeters. Naruto, go home, rest, and if you feel anything, out of the ordinary, you report to me immediately. Dismissed. Naruto walked through the evening streets of Konoha in a daze. The cheers of children and the friendly waves of vendors seemed to belong to another lifetime. The hero they saw was a boy who could make giant frog summons and massive spinning balls of chakra. They had no idea about the serene, terrifying power that had awoken within him today. He didn't have any idea. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, the image of that perfect T-blade burned into the back of his eyelids. The emptiness he'd been feeling for months was still there, but now it had a new quality. It was no longer a void, it was a space waiting to be filled. The power he had touched today felt like the answer to a question he never knew he was asking. He needed answers. Kurama had been quiet, but maybe the old fox knew something. Closing his eyes, Naruto focused inward, drawing on the familiar meditation techniques Jiraiya had taught him. He sank past the conscious layer of his mind, expecting to find the familiar damp, dripping sewer that housed the Nine-Tails cage. He passed the sewer. He kept sinking, falling through a darkness that felt both infinite and comforting. The psychic scent of rust and stagnant water was replaced by the clean, sharp smell of hot metal, ozone, and ancient stone. His bare feet touched down on something solid and warm. He opened his eyes. He was standing in a place of impossible scale. The ground beneath his feet was dark, smooth obsidian, stretching out in every direction to a horizon that was impossibly distant. The sky above was not a sky, but a swirling cosmos of purple and indigo nebulae, dotted with constellations he had never seen. And across this entire landscape, planted in the obsidian floor like a forest of steel, were swords. Millions of them, tens of millions, an infinite number. There were katanas, tachi, nodashi, and zanbato. There were European broadswords, curved scimitars, elegant rapiers, and brutal, cleaver-like falchions. Some were pristine and gleaming, others were ancient and rusted. Some pulsed with a gentle light, others radiated an aura of palpable menace. Each one was unique, each one felt like a dormant soul, waiting. In the center of this continent of blades, miles away but clear as if it were right in front of him, stood a colossal forge. Its chimney reached up to touch the swirling galaxies, and from its heart came a soft, rhythmic thumping, like the beat of a cosmic heart. Naruto stood there, a tiny, insignificant figure in a landscape of legendary power, his mind utterly shattered by the scale and majesty of it all. This was his soul. This was the empty space inside him. From the heart of the great forge, a voice echoed, not in his ears, but in the very center of his being. It was a voice of immense age and power, yet it was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. It was a voice of gravel and starlight, of patience and power, and it resonated with the hum of every single blade in the endless arsenal around him. So, the voice rumbled, with the finality of a closing tomb and the joy of a long-awaited sunrise. You have finally returned. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Forge of Koryu. The world of swords stretched into infinity, a silent testament to a billion battles fought and a billion souls laid to rest. Naruto stood, dwarfed by the sheer scale of his own mindscape, his heart hammering a rhythm against his ribs that was a stark contrast to the profound, cosmic silence of the forge. The voice had come from the colossal structure in the distance, and it was towards this impossible edifice that his feet began to move, carrying him across the warm, dark glass of the floor. As he walked, he noticed the details. The air was clean, carrying the scent of ozone and cooling metal. The swirling nebulae above cast a soft, purple and blue light that reflected off the countless blades, creating a forest of captured starlight. He reached out a hesitant hand and touched the flat of a nearby blade, a huge, slab-like Zanbato that was taller than he was. It was warm, and it vibrated with a low, dormant hum, like a sleeping giant. He felt a fleeting impression from it, not a thought, but an emotion, the fierce, unwavering loyalty of its long-dead wielder. He pulled his hand back as if burned. Every sword here had a story. Every blade was an echo. He finally reached the base of the central forge. It was a structure built on a scale meant for gods. Its dark metal walls rising so high he couldn't see the top, only the place where it vanished into the cosmic clouds. A vast, arched opening glowed with the soft orange light of a contained star. Rhythmic thump of the unseen hammer was louder here, a sound that vibrated deep in his bones. You are Koryu? Naruto asked the emptiness, his voice sounding small. The voice answered, Amana. Ting, not from a single point but from the very structure of the forge itself. I am the echo of the man who was Koryu. As this forge is the echo of his work, and these blades are the echoes of his legacy. I am a memory, imprinted upon the soul you now carry. I am you, and you are me. We are one. Naruto shook his head, the denial instinctual. No, I'm Naruto Uzumaki, genin of the Hidden Leaf, son of the 4th Hokage, student of the Pervy Sage. He listed his titles like a warding chant against this overwhelming new truth. Those are labels, the voice rumbled, not unkindly. Sticks tied Toget, her to make a raft on the river of your life. But the river itself, the water that flows, that is Koryu. That is the soul. A swirling plume of light gathered in the center of the forge's entrance, coalescing into images. A history lesson projected onto the air. He saw a being of pure, brilliant light standing in a void between worlds, a place of roiling chaos. He saw this being, Koryu, learn to draw forth the power of his own soul, his Raryoku, and give it form, the first Asachi. He saw him teach others, beings who would become the first Shinigami, how to do the same. He saw the birth of the Soul Society, a realm stabilized and ordered. But there was a divergence. Koryu saw a flaw in their thinking. The Shinigami sought to impose order, to separate the worlds of the living, the dead, and the hollow, creating rigid boundaries. Koryu believed in balance. He saw a different path. The images shifted. He saw Koryu travel to the world of the living, to a specific, isolated landmass. He read his own immense spiritual power into the very soil, creating a sanctuary where the veil between the physical and spiritual was uniquely thin. In this place, the spiritual energy was so dense that it began to manifest physically within the creatures that lived there, weaving itself into their very lifeblood. It became an internal energy source they could manipulate. They called it chakra. Chakra is just Raryoku. Naruto breathed, his mind reeling. It is Raryoku that has forgotten its origin, the voice corrected. Spiritual power made physical, bound to the flesh. A powerful tool, but a limited one. You, Naruto Uzumaki, were born with the largest reservoir of this chakra, because your soul is a direct reincarnation of Koryu's. The seal your father used to imprison the Nine Tails did not just cage the beast. It used the power of a death god, a Shinigami, to act as the lock. That act, that touch of true Shinigami power upon your soul, was the key. It has taken years for the lock to turn, but the battle with the creature yesterday, it broke the final tumbler. The door is now open. Naruto sank to his knees, the weight of this revelation too much to bear. So everything, my whole life, it's just an echo of someone else. The thought was crushing. His struggles, his pain, his desperate fight for acknowledgement, was it all just a prelude? A vessel is not the water it contains, the voice said softly. The soul of Koryu provides the potential, the power. But your life, your experiences, your bonds, those are what give it shape and purpose. Koryu was a being of balance and creation. Pain made you a savior. Hatred made you understand forgiveness. Loneliness made you cherish your friends. You were not his shadow, Naruto. You were his culmination. You were what he could have been, if he had known what it was to be human. A strange sense of peace began to settle over him. It wasn't an erasure of his identity. It was an expansion of it. He stood up, his blue eyes clear and resolved. Okay, so this power is awake. What do I do with it? Yesterday, in the forest, I just acted. I didn't know how I knew, I just did. That was the soul's instinct, Koryu explained. The memory of the steel. But instinct is not mastery. You are a blacksmith who has inherited the grandest forge in existence, but you have never lifted a hammer. It is time for you to learn. The voice took on a new, commanding tone. This place is your true mind. Time flows differently here. Days in the outside world can be years in the forge. Your training will begin now. Your first lesson. Understanding the blade. The echo directed his attention to the forest of swords. These are not weapons. They are crystallized concepts, histories, ideals. They are not yours to simply take. You tried to pull one from the earth, did you not? They will not yield to you. This is a library, not an armory. To wield a blade, you must first read its story, understand its purpose, and then write it yourself. Show me the blade you manifested in the forest. Naruto concentrated, trying to recall the feeling of the sword in his hand, its perfect weight, its clean power. He reached out, expecting it to materialize. But only faint wisps of blue light flickered around his fingers before dying out. He tried again, gritting his teeth, but the result was the same. You are trying to remember the shape, Koryu's voice instructed. Do not remember the shape. Remember the purpose. Why did it appear? What did you need in that moment? Naruto closed his eyes. The black, writhing mass of malice. The need to end it, cleanly, absolutely. The need for a tool of purification. A simple, final answer to a corrupt question. He focused on the concept. Sever. He opened his hand. The azure white light flowed from his palm, solid and certain this time. Coalescing into the same flawless, unadorned Asachi. It hummed in his grip, a perfect extension of his will. A low, approving rumble echoed from the forge. Good. You have spoken the first word in the language of creation. But a single word is not a conversation. Now, let the blade dissolve. Focus on a new concept. A wall that cannot be broken. A concept of absolute defense. Naruto let the Asachi fade and closed his eyes again. He pictured Sakura behind him, the Arankar's attack. He imagined an unbreakable shield, a barrier to protect what was precious. He pushed the feeling outward. A shimmering square of light, like a pane of glass, formed in front of him. It looked flimsy. Your concept is weak, unfocused, Koryu chided. You are thinking of a shield. Do not think of the object. Think of the ideal. Think of the walls of Konoha standing against pain. Think of the third Hokage's will, protecting his village. Feel the unyielding stubbornness of it. Naruto's brow furrowed. He channeled his own legendary stubbornness, his absolute refusal to give up on Sasuke, his promise to protect his friends. The flimsy square of light thickened, expanded, becoming a huge, round kite shield of solid, glowing energy, its surface etched with swirling patterns like a Rasengan. He could feel its immense resilience. It would not break. Better, the voice acknowledged. You learn. The possibilities are as endless as the blades before you. Each one is a different word. A blade that burns. A blade that freezes. A blade that scatters into 1,000 pieces. A blade that poisons. A blade that heals. To master this power is to become fluent in this language. For a timeless period, that was what Naruto did. Guided by the memory of Koryu, he walked through the forest of steel, not touching the blades, but meditating before them. He would stand before a jagged, serrated cleaver that radiated bloodlust and learn the concept of rend. He would sit before a slender, ice-blue rapier and understand the nuance of pierce. He learned bind from a sword that seemed to be made of chains, and flow from a wavy crisp blade that felt like water. He was not memorizing weapons. He was absorbing philosophies. His next great challenge was merging this new knowledge with what he already knew. Your chakra is a unique tool, Koryu explained as Naruto stood before the forge. It is spiritual power made physical. You have used it to shape the wind, to walk on water, to create clones of solid matter. Now, you must teach it to coexist with its origin. Like a new kind of combination jutsu. Naruto asked. Precisely. Show me your Rasengan. Naruto held out his palm and, with practiced ease, formed the spiraling sphere of blue chakra. It was a familiar comfort, the legacy of his father and his master. A perfect application of shape manipulation, the voice noted. Now, show me a simple Kido. A demon art. The memory of it resides within you. Hado number 4. Byakurai. White lightning. Naruto held out his other hand. He focused, dredging up an instinctual knowledge. A crackling bolt of concentrated white lightning erupted from his fingertips, striking the obsidian floor and leaving a scorched, glassy crater. It felt different from Kakashi's lightning blade, less wild, more focused and pure. Now, Koryu commanded, combine them. Naruto stared at the raging Ba. LL of chakra in one hand and the memory of the sharp, piercing Kido in the other. It seemed impossible. One was a grinding, rotating force, the other was a direct, linear blast. He tried to feed the lightning energy into the Rasengan. The result was an immediate, violent explosion that threw him across the floor, his spiritual form flickering. Foolish, the voice stated, without heat. You cannot pour two different rivers into the same cup at once. You must use one to shape the other. Your Rasengan is the pinnacle of containment and rotation. The Kido is the payload. Use the container. Naruto got to his feet, his mind racing. Use the Rasengan as a container, not as the attack itself. It went against everything he'd been taught. He formed the Rasengan again, but this time he focused on its outer shell, reinforcing it, making the rotation a perfect, impenetrable barrier. Then, carefully, he channeled the spiritual power for the Byakurai into the very center of the sphere. The Rasengan turned a brilliant, blinding white. It became unstable, wobbling violently in his palm. The two energies fought against each other, threatening to detonate again. Balance it. Koryu's voice boomed. Do not force them. Guide them. Let the rotation of the chakra cradle the spiritual energy. Let them dance. Naruto gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his spiritual brow. He poured his concentration into the sphere, not fighting the instability, but moving with it, using the rotation to smooth out the violent energies, weaving them together until they found a violent harmony. The wobbling ceased. In his hand rested a sphere of pure, white light, rotating silently, its core a miniature thunderstorm. Release it, the voice commanded. Naruto thrust his hand forward, aiming at a distant, barren section of the blade forest. The sphere shot from his hand, not grinding against its target, but striking it and then imploding. For a split second, there was silence. Then, a massive pillar of pure WH/ITE lightning erupted from the point of impact, so bright it bleached the color from the nebulae above, so powerful that its roar shook the very foundations of the forge. When the light faded, a vast swath of the sword-filled landscape had been vaporized, leaving nothing but a smooth, glassy crater miles wide. Naruto stared, breathless and awed. He had just created something new, something that was neither ninjutsu nor Kido, but a terrifyingly powerful synthesis of both. A Rasenho. A spiraling cannon. Yes, Koryu's voice said, a deep satisfaction in its tone. You have forged your first true blade. Time ceased to have meaning. Naruto trained, pushed to the limits of his mind and soul. He mastered dozens of Kido spells. He learned to manifest the concepts of 10, then 50, then 100 different blades. He practiced fusing elemental chakra with his new spiritual powers. He sparred against spectral opponents conjured by the forge, learning a new kind of swordsmanship that was fluid and adaptive. Changing his blade and style mid-swing to counter his enemy. He fell into a rhythm of learn, practice, fail, repeat, his mind sharpening to a razor's edge. He did not eat or sleep, he simply endured and grew. Eventually, a sense of finality settled over the forge. The great hammer fell silent. You have learned all you can for now, the voice of Koryu announced. You have the tools. The rest must be learned through experience. It is time to wake up. Your body has rested for one day. Naruto blinked. One day. It felt like years. The mind is a faster realm than the body. Go now. A blacksmith's work is not in the forge, but in the world he arms. Remember what you have learned. You are the balance. The world of swords and nebulae dissolved. Naruto felt a pulling sensation. A rapid ascent through the layers of his own consciousness. He awoke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in his bed. Bright morning sunlight streamed through his window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Someone was knocking insistently on his door. Naruto, are you okay? Lady Tsunade sent me to check on you. It was Shizune. I'm fine, he called out, his own voice sounding strange to him, calmer and deeper than he remembered. He swung his legs out of bed and stood. The world felt clearer, sharper. The frantic, nervous energy that had been his constant companion since childhood was gone. In its place was a deep, quiet well of confidence. He felt the familiar thrum of his own chakra, and beneath it, like a vast, calm ocean, the limitless power of his Raryoku. And deeper still, the profound silence of the forge. Waiting, he knew, with absolute clarity, what his first act with this new power had to be. It wasn't about the Gote 13 or Aizen or any of that. It was about his own world. It was about a promise implied by the very nature of his abilities. He found her exactly where he knew she'd be, the grim, foreboding expanse of Training Ground 44. The Forest of Death was Anko Midarashi's sanctuary, a place as wild and dangerous as she was. She was perched on a high branch of a gargantuan, twisted tree, listlessly throwing a kunai into a target below. She sensed him before she saw him, her head snapping in his direction. Her eyes, usually filled with a mix of mischief and madness, were sharp and suspicious. She leapt from the branch, landing in a crouch before him. Uzumaki, she said, her voice a low hiss. What do you want? I'm here to help you, Naruto said simply, his gaze steady and direct. Anko laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Help me, I don't need help from a snot-nosed brat. Now scram before you become giant centipede food. Yesterday, Naruto continued, ignoring her threat. Around midday, you felt it, didn't you? My power. It affected your cursed seal. Her mocking demeanor vanished, replaced by a tense, predatory stillness. How do you know about that? I can feel it, he said, taking a step closer. I can see it, a parasite of corrupt Cha. Kra and twisted runes latched onto your soul. When I used my power yesterday, it recoiled. You felt a moment of peace, didn't you? Anko's hand flew to her neck, her knuckles white. He was right, he knew. Her mind raced, a dozen cynical, self-destructive impulses warring with a single, desperate spark of hope. What is this power? What are you? It's new, he answered truthfully. And it's complicated. But I think I can remove that seal. Not suppress it, destroy it. Her breath hitched. That was a promise no one, not even the Hokage, had ever been able to make. It was a dream she had abandoned long ago. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would you do that for me? Because it's the right thing to do, Naruto said, his voice soft but firm. And because no one should have to live with a piece of Orochimaru inside them. But I need you to know two things. First, it's going to hurt. Probably more than anything you've ever felt. Second, you have to trust me. Completely. If you fight me, even for a second, I could damage your soul permanently. She stared at him, at the calm certainty in his ancient-looking blue eyes. This wasn't the loudmouthed idiot she remembered from the Chunin exams. This was someone else, someone with a weight and gravity she had only ever seen in the Sannin. The hope, fragile as it was, won out over the fear. She gave a single, jerky nod. He led her to a small, secluded clearing. Sit, he instructed. She obeyed, crossing her legs on the damp earth, her entire body trembling with a mixture of terror and anticipation. Naruto knelt in front of her. This will be the hardest part, he said. Drop all your defenses. Don't instinctively raise your chakra to block the pain. You have to let me in. She closed her eyes and took a shuddering breath. Just get it over with. Naruto placed his right hand gently over the three tomo on her neck. He closed his eyes and focused, not on his chakra, but on the ocean of Raryoku within him. He let it flow, pure and white, from his palm into her. From his perspective, he was diving into a swamp. He saw her soul, a fierce purple fire, but it was being choked by a grotesque, coiling serpent of black and violet energy. Runes glowed within the serpent's form, pulsing with Orochimaru's malevolent will. It was a masterful piece of fuinjutsu, woven directly into her spiritual essence. With his newfound senses, he could see every thread, every knot. He began to work, not with a sledgehammer, but with the delicate precision of a surgeon. He manifested his Raryoku as microscopic blades of light, targeting the connecting threads one by one. Sever, sever, sever. From Anko's perspective, it was pure agony. It felt like her very soul was being flayed. The cursed seal fought back, flooding her body with a pain so intense it dwarfed every other sensation. Black markings began to spread from the seal across her skin. But through the torment, she felt his presence. It wasn't an attack, it was a steady, unwavering force. A cleansing fire that was burning away the poison. She grit her teeth so hard she tasted blood, her fists clenched in the dirt, but she held still. She trusted him. Naruto worked tirelessly, sweat pouring down his face. He dismantled a full third of the seal's structure, unraveling decades of Orochimaru's corruption. It was too deep, too intertwined to remove in one session. It would kill her, but he had made a start. He carefully withdrew his power, sealing off the raw edges of the wound he'd left in the seal's structure. The agonizing pain subsided, leaving Anko gasping and limp. Drenched in sweat, the black markings receded. She took a breath, then another. The constant, low-grade ache in her neck was gone. The venomous whispers in her mind were silent. The piece of Orochimaru that had been her constant companion was quieter. Muted, she slowly opened her eyes and looked at Naruto. He was pale and breathing heavily, the effort having cost him dearly. She saw no pity in his eyes, only a quiet, professional respect. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of what it was to be whole. A bond, forged in shared agony and absolute trust, had been sealed between them. Naruto offered a small, tired smile and reached out a hand to help her up. "It's a start." As his fingers grasped hers, a sound ripped through the peaceful afternoon. A piercing, village-wide siren blared, the high-pitched wail of the Anbu emergency broadcast, a sound reserved for an imminent, catastrophic invasion. They both froze, their heads snapping towards the sky. To the east, above the Hokage monument, reality was tearing apart. A black line split the heavens, widening and stretching like a wound being ripped in the fabric of space. It was a Garganta, a portal to another world, but it was 100 times larger and more stable than the fleeting vortex from the other day. And from it, a spiritual pressure so immense, so cold and terrifying, washed over Konohagakure like a tidal wave. It was the pressure of beings whose power dwarfed the malformed creature from the forest. On the streets below, civilians choked and collapsed to their knees. Even veteran Jonin found it hard to breathe, their bodies screaming at them to flee from the presence of such impossible predators. Anko stumbled, her legs threatening to buckle under the weight of it, but Naruto stood firm beside her, a bulwark of calm. His own vast spiritual power rose to the surface, an ocean meeting a tsunami, shielding them both from the worst of the pressure. His blue eyes, now ancient and sharp, stared at the rip in his world. Koryu's words echoed in his mind. The door is now open. He had spent a lifetime dealing with the threats within his world. Now, for the first time, he looked up at the sky and understood. The real threat had just arrived from without. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Uninvited Guests. The siren's wail was the scream of the village itself. It echoed off the Hokage monument, rattled the windows of the hospital, and sent a fresh wave of panic through the already terrified populace. In the forest of death, Naruto and Anko stood side by side, a silent partnership forged moments before in agony and trust, their eyes fixed on the bleeding sky. The spiritual pressure was a physical thing. It was a crushing weight that stole the breath, a psychic cold that had nothing to do with the humid afternoon air. It made the world feel thin and fragile, as if it might shatter under the sheer presence of whatever was coming. Anko, still drained from Naruto's purification, had to brace a hand against a tree to remain standing. Naruto stood unflinching, a rock in a raging river, his own newly awakened Po.W were pushing back against the oppressive tide, creating a small pocket of normalcy around them. From the Hokage Tower, Tsunade's voice, amplified by wind-style jutsu, boomed across the village. All civilians to the designated shelters. Now, Jonin squads, establish a level 4 defensive perimeter. Do not engage without direct orders. Medical Corps, prepare for mass casualties. Her commands were sharp, decisive. The practiced orders of a veteran cage facing the unknown. We have to go, Naruto said, his voice a low, steady calm that belied the chaos. They're coming for me. He didn't know how he knew. But the pressure pouring from the Garganta had a distinct focus, a pinpoint direction amidst its overwhelming spread. It was a spear aimed at his heart. They moved, a blur of motion through the trees. They were not alone. A silver-haired figure in a Jonin flak jacket landed silently beside them. Things have escalated, Kakashi stated, his single eye grim and fixed on the celestial wound. Any insight, Naruto? They're not from here, Naruto said simply. And they're strong. Keep everyone else back, Kakashi-sensei. I don't think their jutsu will work on these guys any better than they did on the last one. They broke through the tree line, arriving at the edge of the expansive training fields that bordered the eastern forest. Before them, the Garganta pulsed, a swirling vortex of black and violet energy. And from its depths, two figures emerged. They descended with a grace that was not of this world, landing on the packed earth without a sound. They were a study in contrasts. The first was a boy, or at least he had the appearance of one, with stark white, spiky hair and piercing turquoise eyes. His expression was a mask of cold professionalism, a permanent scowl etched onto his youthful features. Over his stark black kimono, the traditional shihakusho, he wore a sleeveless white haori, the unmistakable uniform of a captain of the Gote 13. At his hip rested a katana with a four-pointed, star-shaped guard. The second figure was his polar opposite. She was a tall, curvaceous woman with wavy, strawberry blonde hair that fell to the middle of her back. Where the boy was tense and rigid, she was relaxed, almost slouched, her expression one of mild, detached curiosity. Her lieutenant's armband was tied loosely around her arm. Her presence was softer, warmer, but Naruto could feel the immense, coiled power beneath her casual demeanor, like a sleeping lioness. Their eyes, both pairs, immediately locked onto Naruto, ignoring the other powerful shinobi gathering at the edge of the woods. In a world of green and brown chakra signatures, Naruto's new blue-white spiritual energy burned like a lighthouse in a storm. So that's it, the boy captain said, his voice cold and clipped. The anomaly. Its Ryutsu is immense, but it's chaotic, unstable, a blend of a soul and some other crude, physical energy. Well now, Captain, the woman drawled, a playful smirk on her lips as she looked Naruto up and down. He's certainly more interesting to look at than the readings suggested. I was expecting a giant slug monster. Naruto took a step forward, placing himself squarely between the newcomers and the village perimeter where Sakura, Sai, and a dozen other shinobi were now arrayed. You're a long way from home, he called out, his voice even. You're trespassing in the Hidden Leaf Village. State your names and your purpose. The captain's scowl deepened. We are the ones who ask the questions. I am Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya of Squad 10. This is my lieutenant, Rangaku Matsumoto. We are here under the authority of the Soul Society to investigate a dangerously powerful spiritual signature. You, he pointed a single, accusatory finger at Naruto. You will identify yourself and surrender for questioning. Your very existence is a violation of the balance. The words hung in the air, an immediate declaration of hostility. Naruto felt his friends tense behind him, but he held up a hand, signaling them to stand down. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said, his voice losing none of its calm. And I don't answer to any Soul Society. This is my home. You are the invaders here. The only one violating the balance is you, by tearing a hole in our sky. So you can take your authority, turn around, and go back through that hole before you get hurt. Hitsugaya's eyes narrowed to slits. The sheer audacity, the calm defiance from this unknown entity, was infuriating. You are in no position to make threats, he snapped. Your energy is powerful, but it is untamed. You are a danger to your own world and ours. I will not ask again. Surrender now, or be subdued by force. He placed a hand on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. I don't think so, Naruto replied, his stance shifting into a relaxed but ready posture. I just spent the last day learning who I am. I'm not about to let some short-tempered kid in a bathrobe drag me away in chains. Rangaku let out a soft chuckle, earning a sharp glare from her captain. The short-tempered kid comment had struck a nerve. That's it, Hitsugaya growled, his patience gone. Your insolence ends now. In a blur of Ion too fast for most of the assembled Jonin to track, he appeared directly in front of Naruto, his sword already drawn and swinging in a deadly arc. It was a test, a probing strike meant to gauge his opponent's skill. Naruto didn't manifest a blade. He simply moved. His body flowed with the grace of water, a seamless blend of Shinigami Shunpo and shinobi body flicker that he had perfected in the forge. He sidestepped the blade with inches to spare, the wind from its passage rustling his jacket. He flowed around Hitsugaya, appearing behind him, his hands still in his pockets. Hitsugaya spun, surprised by the boy's speed. He unleashed a flurry of strikes, his blade a silver web of death. Naruto met the assault with nothing but movement, his evasion so efficient and fluid it looked less like a fight and more like a dance. He wasn't just dodging, he was analyzing, learning the rhythm of Hitsugaya's swordsmanship, the reach of his blade, the slight shift of his weight before each attack. Stand still and fight, Hitsugaya snarled, frustration creeping into his voice. All right, Naruto said, his voice placid. He stopped moving. Seeing his opening, Hitsugaya thrust his blade forward, aiming for Naruto's shoulder. Just as the tip was about to make contact, Naruto's right hand shot out, catching the captain's wrist in an iron grip. Hitsugaya's eyes widened in shock. The raw physical strength was far greater than he had anticipated. My turn, Naruto said, and with a simple flick of his wrist, he disarmed the captain, sending his Zanpakuto spinning into the air. He followed the Ion with a palm strike aimed at Hitsugaya's chest, forcing the captain to abandon his sword and use a flash step to retreat, catching his blade as he reappeared 50 feet away. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds. The Konoha shinobi watched in stunned silence. Naruto had just casually disarmed an opponent whose power made their skin crawl. Hitsugaya's face was a thundercloud. He had been toyed with. I see, he said, his voice dangerously low. You are more than just raw power. In that case, I will show you the respect of a true opponent. He raised his Zanpakuto, a wave of cold energy pouring from him. Sit upon the frozen heavens, Harem. The air temperature plummeted. A colossal, serpentine dragon made of pure ice and spiritual power erupted from his blade, its roar shaking the very ground. It coiled in the sky above him before diving directly at Naruto, its jaws open wide to shatter and freeze. The Konoha shinobi braced for an impact that could flash freeze half the training grounds. But Naruto remained calm. Ice, he murmured, a word of understanding. The concept was simple, absolute zero, the cessation of motion. He held out his hand, and for the second time in 2 days, he manifested a blade from nothing. This one was different from the first. It was a long, slender tachi, its blade forged from what looked like perfectly clear, crystalline ice. It had no color, merely refracting the late afternoon light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It radiated an aura of cold so intense it seemed to suck the warmth out of the very concept of heat. It was not a copy of Harem. It was the pure, platonic ideal of cold given a cutting edge. As the massive ice dragon descended, Naruto swung his crystalline blade in a simple, rising arc. The moment his sword made contact with the dragon's head, a chain reaction occurred. Cracks of pure white energy shot through the dragon's entire body. Its furious roar died in its throat, and the entire, massive construct shattered into a billion glittering motes of harmless frost that drifted down like a gentle snowfall. Hitsugaya's jaw was clenched so tight it was a wonder his teeth didn't crack. His ultimate Shikai technique, shattered with a single, casual swing. He flash-stepped forward, his own ice-wreathed blade clashing against Naruto's. The sound was not the clang of steel, but the high-pitched chime of 2 glaciers grinding together. Every time Harem tried to release a wave of freezing energy, Naruto's blade would simply absorb it, its own crystalline structure seeming to grow even colder, even more absolute. How? Hitsugaya demanded, their blades locked. What is that Zanpakuto? I've never sensed a Ryutsu like it. It's not a Zanpakuto, Naruto replied calmly, easily holding his ground. It's just a tool I needed for the job. Seeing her captain locked in a stalemate against an opponent who was clearly not taking the fight seriously, Rangaku finally sighed. Honestly, you boys and your measuring contests, she said, stepping forward. My turn, Captain. Let's see if he can handle a different approach. She drew her own blade. Growl. Hineka. Her sword dissolved in her hand, transforming into a swirling, expansive cloud of razor-sharp ash. The cloud was alive, a sentient weapon that could act as a shield, a cutting whirlwind, or 1,000 tiny blades at once. It swept around the dueling pair, aiming to envelop Naruto from all sides. Naruto disengaged from Hitsugaya, flash stepping back. His ice blade dissolved into mist. He faced the swirling gray cloud, his eyes analytical. He could feel it. Each particle of ash was a tiny, spiritually projected blade. A direct defense would be useless. It would just flow around any shield. An area of effect attack might disperse it, but it would just reform. The solution wasn't to fight the cloud. It was to fight the control. Interesting, he said. The concept he needed now was not cold, but dominion. He held out his hand again. A new sword formed. This one was a longsword, its blade the color of dark, polished hematite. It had a strange, subtle magnetism to it, seeming to bend the light around it. It felt heavy, ancient. A blade meant to command rather than simply cut. Here it comes, Rangaku called out, and with a wave of her hilt, the ash cloud collapsed inward, aiming to shred Naruto from 100 different angles at once. Naruto swung his new blade in a slow, horizontal arc. He didn't try to cut the ash. He didn't try to block it. He simply swung. The sword of dominion pulsed with a subtle gravitational force. The incoming cloud of razors faltered. Its chaotic, aggressive swirl was broken, and all at once, every single particle of ash was drawn into the sword's influence. The cloud was pulled from Rangaku's control, forming a tight, harmless vortex that spun around Naruto's blade like a miniature gray galaxy. He had not only defended against her Shikai, he had stolen it. Rangaku Matsumoto stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. Her connection to Hineka was still there, but it was muted. It was like her Zanpakuto spirit was refusing to listen to her, its attention completely captivated by the man holding it in check. She could feel Hineka's spirit not as frustrated or defeated, but as content. Purring, a kitten that had found a warm, impossibly powerful hand to curl up in. The feeling was so foreign, so deeply intimate. It sent a shiver down her spine. Hitsugaya stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. This boy, this anomaly, had countered his ice with superior ice. He had countered Rangaku's ash by simply taking control of it. He did it all with a calm, analytical detachment, manifesting the perfect conceptual counter on a whim. This wasn't a fight, it was a lesson. This being wasn't just powerful. He was a master of the very principles of their power, in a way they had never imagined. This was a threat on a scale that made him think of one name, and one name only, Sosuke Aizen. The thought of unleashing his Bankai crossed his mind, but a deeper instinct told him it would be just as useless. Naruto stood there, Hineka's ash swirling harmlessly around his dark blade. His expression unchanged. He had made his point. Before the standoff could break, before a single word could be spoken, a new sound tore through the air. It was a deep, guttural roar from somewhere above them. A sound of pure, mindless hunger. A second Garganta, this one smaller, messier, and angrier than the first, ripped open a few hundred yards away. A colossal figure stepped out. It was easily 40 feet tall, cloaked in a robe of shifting blackness, with a long, pointed nose like a dagger and dead, vacant eyes. It was a Jillian-class Manos Grande, the common foot soldier of the Hollow Armies. Drawn irresistibly to the massive spiritual energies being thrown around, the Jillian let out another roar, a wall of sound that vibrated with soul-crushing despair. The three combatants, Naruto, Hitsugaya, and Rangaku, instinctively turned to face the new, common enemy. Their own conflict was, for the moment, utterly irrelevant. Naruto let the sword of dominion and the captured ash dissipate. He glanced at the two Shinigami, a wry, challenging glint in his blue eyes. "So much for your balance," he said, his voice cutting through the Mano's roar. He cracked his knuckles, a wide, confident grin spreading across his face for the first time. "All right, let's see what you two are really made of." Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. An alliance forged in ash. The roar of the Manos Grande was a sound of absolute despair. It was the collective shriek of 1,000 tormented souls compressed into a single, deafening wave of sound that promised only oblivion. A crimson light began to gather at its mouth, a burgeoning star of destructive energy that warped the air around it. "A Sero. That's a Sero," Hitsugaya barked, his professionalism overriding his shock. His mind fell back on ingrained doctrine. Standard Jillian class engagement protocol. "Lieutenant, evasive maneuvers. Draw its fire to the left flank. I will suppress its legs and go for a disabling cut." "Bad plan," Naruto stated, his voice cutting through the captain's orders with unshakable authority. Hitsugaya's head snapped towards him, his eyes flashing with indignation. "It's too slow and its hide is too thick for a simple disabling cut to work." Naruto continued, his gaze fixed on the charging Sero, his mind processing the tactical data flowing from Koryu's combat memories. "It has no critical points except for the mask. A single, overwhelmingly powerful attack to the head is the only efficient method. Anything else is a waste of energy. Do you presume to lecture a captain of the Gote 13 on how to fight a hollow?" Hitsugaya retorted, but his protest was cut short as the Manos unleashed its attack. A colossal beam of crimson energy tore through the sky, incinerating a wide swath of the forest and carving a deep, molten trench in the earth where they had been standing only moments before. The sheer, raw power was breathtaking. They had all flash-stepped to safety, but the heat wash that followed was intense enough to make the air shimmer. "See," Naruto said simply, as if discussing a minor point in a sparring match. "Wasted energy. It just blew a hole in a perfectly good forest. Now, how about we try it my way? Distract it. I'll bind it." Rangaku, landing gracefully beside her captain, gave Naruto a curious look. "Bind it? With what?" "With something you'll find familiar," he said with a cryptic smile. Before his expression hardened into one of pure focus. "Just buy me a few seconds." Hitsugaya ground his teeth, every instinct screaming at him for taking orders from this orange-clad anomaly. But the proof of the creature's power was a smoldering scar upon the landscape. His plan had been flawed. This boy's was untested, but decisive. "Fine," he snapped. "Matsumoto, on it, Captain." Rangaku was already in motion. Hineka's ash cloud swirling around the Manos' head, not to cause damage, but to obscure its vision and irritate it. The great beast swatted at the cloud, roaring in frustration. Hitsugaya appeared at its feet, driving Harem into the ground. A wave of ice shot outwards, encasing the Jillian's legs in thick, cracking layers of frost, slowing its movements. It was the opening Naruto needed. He moved, his hands a blur. But he was not weaving the familiar hand seals of a ninja. His gestures were broader, more arcane, like a conductor commanding an orchestra of unseen forces. His lips were set, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was drawing on the pure spiritual energy within him, the Raryoku, and shaping it with the remembered knowledge of the forge. "Bakudo number 61, he incanted, his voice resonating with power. Raikujokuro." 6 wide, flat beams of golden spiritual light materialized in the air around the Manos. They slammed into IT's torso from all sides with the force of a battering ram, locking it in place in a cage of pure energy. The Manos struggled, its immense strength straining against the spiritual construct, but the cage held firm. Hitsugaya and Rangaku both froze mid-attack, their eyes wide with disbelief. "No incantation," Hitsugaya breathed. "That was a Kido spell in the 60s. A powerful binding art that most Shinigami, even lieutenants, needed to recite a full incantation to achieve that level of strength. To cast it silently, with that much power and perfect form, was a feat reserved for the Kido Corps masters or high-ranking captains. And this boy had done it as if it were second nature." Naruto didn't pause to admire his work. The Manos was already cracking the light beams with its brute force. "Not strong enough," he muttered, flowing into his next technique. "Bakudo number 75, Gochuteken." He slammed his open palm towards the struggling hollow. From the sky above, 5 colossal pillars of spiritual iron, each as thick as an ancient tree, crashed down around the Manos. One slammed onto its back, forcing it to its knees, while the other 4 pinned its limbs to the ground, driving it into the earth under their immense weight. The Manos was completely, utterly immobilized. Now, Naruto yelled, his voice ringing with command. The mask, do it! The shout broke Hitsugaya from his stupor. The opportunity was perfect. Shaking his head to clear the cloud of 1,000 questions, he focused on the mission. He vanished in a burst of shunpo, reappearing in the air directly before the restrained Jillian's face. He raised Hirenmaru high, pouring his power into the single, decisive strike. HMPH, he grunted, bringing the blade down. The diamond-hard mask of the Manos shat red into a dozen pieces with a sound like cracking porcelain. The creature let out one last, long, almost peaceful sigh, and its entire towering form dissolved, disintegrating into black and red party cleys that drifted away on the evening breeze, leaving only 5 rapidly fading iron pillars and a cage of light. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of burning trees at the edge of the Cerro's blast path. The sun was dipping below the horizon now, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange, purple, and red. The long shadows stretched across the cratered, smoking battlefield, giving the scene a surreal, painterly quality. The 3 of them stood in the ruin, a strange triangle of disparate power. Hitsugaya slowly lowered his sword, his mind a whirlwind of contradictions. He had come here to subdue a threat. Instead, he had been fought to a standstill, then guided to victory by that same threat. The Kido, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion as he turned to face Naruto. That was not a memory. That was not instinct. That was mastery. Raikujokuro and Gochuteken, cast without incantation, in perfect succession. There are perhaps 5 people in all of the Seraite who could replicate that feat. Where did you learn that? I told you, Naruto said, his posture relaxing as the last of the Kido constructs faded. When I woke up yesterday, I just knew it. It's like I have a library in my head. I just have to find the right book. He shrugged, as if it were that simple. The answer was so absurd, so impossible, that it was actually more infuriating than a lie. Captain, Rangaku said, her voice soft as she came to stand beside Hitsugaya. She had dispelled her own shikai, her expression thoughtful and serious. Her earlier playfulness was gone. He's not lying, and I don't think he's our enemy. He fought us defensively, and the moment a true enemy appeared, he led us to victory. Maybe if we stop trying to arrest him and start talking to him, we might get some actual answers. Hitsugaya stared at Naruto, his turquoise eyes searching for any hint of deception. He found none, only a calm, steady confidence that was utterly unnerving. He let out a long, frustrated sigh, the cold mist of his breath visible in the cooling air. Fine, he conceded, sheathing Hirenmaru with a decisive click. Talk. They found a large, upturned tree root that had been spared the destruction, and an impromptu, tense council of worlds began. Naruto, surprisingly, went first. He explained the elemental nations, the concept of the hidden villages, and the nature of chakra as an internal physical energy shinobi used to perform jutsu. He framed it simply, leaving out the more complex details of Biju and Jinchuriki for now. In turn, Hitsugaya, with frequent, more diplomatic interjections from Rangaku, explained their reality. They spoke of the Soul Society, a spiritual afterlife for the souls of the dead. They described their duty as Shinigami, guiding the souls of the departed, called pluses, to the Soul Society, and purifying the corrupted, monstrous souls of hollows. They maintained the balance of souls between the worlds, a cosmic cycle Naruto's very existence seemed to threaten. And this Aizen you mentioned? Naruto asked, latching onto a name he'd heard before. The Urankar that attacked my village yesterday served him. A grim shadow passed over Hitsugaya's face. Sosuke Aizen was a former captain of the Gote 13. He was a traitor of the highest order who attempted to overthrow the Soul King and recreate reality in his own image. He was defeated, but the damage he caused was immense. He created Urankar, hollows who have removed their masks to gain Shinigami-like powers. If one of them is here, it means Aizen's will, or at least his creations, have survived his fall. As they spoke, the dynamic between them shifted. Hitsugaya was a soldier and a politician, speaking in terms of order and cosmic law. Naruto was a protector, his questions always circling back to how this new reality affected his home and his people. But it was Rangaku who bridged the gap. She focused on the personal, the human, or spiritual, element. "That sword you made of ice," she said, looking at Naruto. Her violet eyes sharp with intelligence. "And the one that controlled my Hinata. What did it feel like to create them?" Naruto paused, considering his answer. "It didn't feel like creating," he said slowly. "It felt like remembering." The ice blade was absolute stillness. The dark one was about control, about making things obey. "It's hard to explain." He then turned his gaze on her. A flicker of insight in his eyes. "Your sword is interesting. The spirit inside, Hinata, she's proud. And very sharp-witted. But she's also lonely. She's waiting for someone who can keep up with her." Rangaku's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't talking about her fighting style or the mechanics of her shikai. He was talking about the very soul of her Zanpakuto, her partner. With a casual intimacy that no one had ever shown before. It was a deeply personal, startlingly accurate observation. It felt like he'd just seen a hidden part of her own soul. She recovered with a practiced, breathy laugh. My, for a boy who just learned he's some kind of ancient spirit, you're quite the charmer." She leaned forward slightly. "And what about you, Mr. Hero of the Leaf? I see a boy who's surrounded by people who adore him, but who feels utterly alone. Am I wrong?" Naruto's faint smile didn't waver, but his eyes told her she'd hit the mark. A current of understanding passed between them. A silent acknowledgement of the masks they both wore. Hitsugaya watched the exchange, a frown on his face, sensing a rapport building that he was not a part of. It was in that moment of quiet understanding that a new presence made itself known. It was not an explosion of power like the Garganta, but the opposite. A subtle silence, a sudden absence of sound from the nearby woods. A sleek, impossibly black cat with intelligent, luminous golden eyes patted out from the shadows of the trees. It moved with a liquid grace, its paws making no sound on the broken earth. It stopped a dozen feet away from them, sat down, and began to calmly lick a paw, observing them as if they were a mildly interesting piece of theater. Hitsugaya and Rangaku were instantly on guard, their hands drifting to their swords. This was no ordinary animal. It had a spiritual presence, but it was so perfectly controlled, so suppressed, that it was almost impossible to read. "Well now," Rangaku murmured, her eyes softening slightly. "For a creature of spirit, you're awfully cute." The cat stopped licking its paw. It looked directly at her, and its mouth opened. A voice, smooth, feminine, and dripping with amused, ancient authority, emerged, startling them all. Cute is one word for it. Uninvited is another. A captain, a lieutenant, and a brand new goatling, all making a terrible mess in a forgotten corner of the world. "You three have been very naughty." Before anyone could react to the talking cat, it was enveloped in a sudden, dense swirl of smoke and spiritual energy. The smoke billowed upwards, and when it cleared, the cat was gone. In its place stood one of the most striking women any of them had ever seen. She was tall, with dark skin that seemed to absorb the twilight, piercing golden eyes, and long violet hair tied in a neat ponytail. She was dressed in a simple black, backless outfit, with orange guards over her forearms and shins. Her posture was relaxed, yet she radiated a predatory power and a confidence that dwarfed everyone else present. Hitsugaya's eyes went wide with shock and recognition. "Why Yoruichi Shihoin?" he stammered, his voice losing its composure for the first time. The former captain of Squad 2, the Flash Master. Yoruichi ignored him completely. She ignored Rangaku. Her sharp, intelligent gaze was fixed solely on Naruto, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her features. She looked him up and down, from the strange seal on his stomach to the newfound wisdom in his eyes. "So, the rumors are true," she purred, her voice like velvet and steel. "The old bloodline awakens. A shinobi who knows Kido and can manifest the concept of a Zanpakuto at will. I haven't seen anything this interesting in 100 years." She took a step closer, circling him like a panther sizing up a strange new creature. "You've had a fun little crash course, boy," she said, her grin widening. "But your form is sloppy. Your control is raw, and you have no idea what you're truly capable of. She stopped in front of him, her golden eyes glinting with mischief and immense power. She winked. Your real education is about to begin. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past, Shadows of the Future. The tension on the training ground was thick enough to be a physical force. Hitsugaya's hand rested on the hilt of his Zanpakuto, his expression a mask of disbelief and deep-seated suspicion directed at the newcomer. Rangaku stood in a state of relaxed readiness, her curiosity piqued. And at the center of it all, Yoruichi Shihoin, the legendary Flash Master, stood as if she owned the very ground they stood on, her predatory golden eyes fixed solely on Naruto. Before the standoff could devolve, the sound of dozens of silent footsteps heralded the arrival of the Hokage. Tsunade landed lightly in the clearing, flanked by a full squad of her most elite Anbu, their porcelain masks hiding whatever emotions this impossible scene evoked. Her sharp gaze took in the cratered landscape, the two unknown Shinigami, the infamous exile Yoruichi, and finally, her surrogate son, Naruto, who stood at the eye of this interdimensional storm. Yoruichi, Tsunade said, her voice dangerously calm. It has been a long time. You have 10 seconds to explain why you are in my village, and why you've brought 2 more of your kind with you, before I decide to get hostile. Yoruichi's grin didn't falter. Always so aggressive, Tsunade Harem. Don't worry, these 2 aren't with me. They just happened to crash the same party. She gestured a thumb towards Naruto. I'm here for him. We have a mutual interest in seeing him survive what's coming. She laid out the situation with a speed and clarity that left no room for argument. She explained her long exile in the human world, monitoring the unstable remnants of Aizen's forces and the subtle tears in reality they were creating. She had felt the awakening of Koryu's soul within Naruto like a psychic earthquake. She knew, with certainty, that this would make Naruto the single most valuable target for any being seeking ultimate power. He's a newborn god in a world full of hungry titans, Yoruichi concluded, her tone stripped of its earlier playfulness. He has the power, but he lacks control and refinement. I can give him that. I can teach him to fight not like a shinobi or a shinigami, but as what he is, something new. In return, I want sanctuary and your full cooperation. This is bigger than the leaf, bigger than the Soul Society. Aizen, or whatever is left of his ambition, is making a play for the ultimate power source. And your boy is sitting right on top of it. Tsunade listened, her mind processing the tactical and political ramifications. To harbor an exile and 2 active duty Shinigami was a declaration of something. An alliance, an act of war, but to refuse Yoruichi's offer, to leave Naruto's incredible new power raw and untamed, was a risk she couldn't afford. Yoruichi was right. This was bigger than any village politics. And them. Tsunade nodded towards Hitsugaya and Rangaku. They will remain in Konoha as liaisons, Yoruichi said, the word dripping with irony. Official channels to the Soul Society. For when they inevitably come looking for their lost captain, it's better to have them as observed guests than as prisoners or enemies. Hitsugaya opened his mouth to protest, but sharp look from Rangaku silenced him. She understood the political reality faster than he did. They were stranded, outgunned, and in a world they didn't comprehend. Cooperation was their only logical path forward. Fine, Tsunade said, her authority absolute. Yoruichi, you will have your sanctuary. You will train Naruto. But you will answer to me. Captain Hitsugaya, you and your Lieutenant will be given quarters and treated as diplomatic guests, but you will be monitored at all times. This is my village, my rules. She turned to Naruto. And you, try not to destroy any more of the training grounds. Yoruichi's idea of a training ground was an abandoned temple complex hidden deep within the forests south of Konoha, so ancient it predated the village itself. It was nestled in a secluded valley behind a massive, roaring waterfall, the constant mist keeping the air cool and the old stone slick. The main temple building was a masterpiece of worn, dark wood, its air thick with the scent of petrified incense and moss. This place was dedicated to a minor god of speed and storms, Yoruichi explained as she led Naruto into a wide, open-air dojo overlooking the valley. Fitting, I thought. Her training began not with a lecture, but with a beating. Your fighting style is a mess, she stated, effortlessly ducking under a powerful kick from Naruto and tapping him sharply on the back of the knee, causing his leg to buckle. It's all raw power, wild swings, and a ridiculous over-reliance on shadow clones to overwhelm your opponents. You fight like a brawler, not a warrior. For an hour, Naruto couldn't land a single blow. Yoruichi was a phantom, a whisper of motion. She never used a flashy technique. It was all pure, brutally efficient hand-to-hand combat, Hakuda. Every move was economical, a sharp jab to a nerve cluster, a precise kick to a joint, a quick throw that used his own momentum against him. She dismantled his taijutsu with the ease of a master taking apart a child's toy. Your frog Kata is powerful, she conceded, blocking a chakra-laden fist with her forearm, the impact echoing through the valley. But it's wide. The movements are too large. You telegraph every attack, and your speed. She vanished. Naruto spun, trying to locate her, only to grunt in pain as a sharp kick connected with his spine, sending him stumbling forward. Your Shunshin is just a linear burst of speed. It's predictable. You're fast, but you're not clever. Panting, Naruto straightened up, frustration and determination warring in his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was learning. This as the same feeling he'd had in the forge, the discovery of a vast, new landscape of knowledge. So teach me, he said, settling back into his stance. And she did. She taught him the foundation of Ho-Ho, the Shinigami art of movement. It wasn't just about speed, but about efficiency, about minimizing wasted motion to create a fluid, multi-directional dance of evasion and attack. She drilled him in the fundamentals of Hakuda, forcing him to strike not with brute force, but with precision, aiming for pressure points and spiritual connections he could now perceive. The breakthrough came on the third day of relentless training. Exhausted, bruised, but with a mind clearer than it had ever been, Naruto stopped trying to replace his style with hers. He began to fuse them. He charged at her, but instead of a direct assault, he dropped into the low, wide stance of the frog Kata. He used its unpredictable, animalistic feints to disguise his true intent. As Yoruichi moved to counter a feigned lunge, he exploded forward. Not with a simple Shunshin, but with a Ho-Ho flash step that he powered with an explosive release of chakra. The burst of speed was phenomenal. He appeared at her flank, and instead of a wide, powerful punch, he delivered a tight, compact Hakuda strike aimed at her ribs. His knuckles connected with her forearm as she brought it up to block at the last possible second. The 4-CE of the blow sent a shockwave through the air, and for the first time, Yoruichi was forced back a step, her golden eyes wide with genuine surprise. A slow, predatory grin spread across her face. There it is, she purred. A new level of respect in her voice. Not shinobi, not shinigami, something else. She christened his new style on the spot. Shunshin Ryu, the God Step style. Now, her grin widened. Let's see if you can do it again. Their spars became a true battle of masters, a blur of orange and black against the serene backdrop of the ancient temple, their movements a new language of combat being written with every blow. While Naruto trained, Tsunade governed. She sat behind her desk, the cage had a heavy weight beside her, as she faced the withering disapproval of Homura and Koharu. You have endangered this entire village, Tsunade. Koharu said, her voice thin and reedy with age and fear. Harboring an S-class missing nin, allowing these, Shinigami, free rein. It is an act of utter recklessness. What will the other villages say? The other villages are irrelevant at the moment, Tsunade countered, her voice like steel. A new threat has emerged, one that can tear whole S in reality and is immune to conventional ninjutsu. Our only source of information and our greatest weapon against it are the 3 individuals you want me to cast out. This is not recklessness, Koharu. It is adaptation. It is the will of fire. To protect the village, no matter the cost or the method. She held their gazes, her own filled with an iron resolve that had been forged in 2 wars and tempered by unimaginable loss. The elders eventually fell silent, unable to argue against her unyielding authority. She was the Hokage. Her word was law, but the meeting was a stark reminder of the political battle she was fighting on a second front. After they had left, Shizune entered with a stack of intelligence reports. Lady Tsunade, another one, she said, her voice tense. Reports from Kurigakure Intelligence. Strange sightings off the coast of the Land of Water. A creature, half human, half sea monster, attacking shipping boats. The energy signature is faint, but it matches the residue from that first creature Naruto fought. Quote, Tsunade read the report, her brow furrowed. Another one. This is spreading. She filed the report away, a new weight settling on her shoulders. For now, it was a distant problem. Konoha's defense came first. That evening, during a break in his training, Naruto overheard two Anbu guards reporting the news from the Land of Water to Yoruichi. The description: a girl, transformed. A creature of the sea, pricked at a distant, half-forgotten memory. A mission from years ago. A scientist named Amachi. A girl named Isaribi. A failed attempt to cure her. He had saved her, but he hadn't been able to fix her. A sense of responsibility, deeper and more profound than any he had felt before, settled over him. Koryu's power wasn't just for fighting. It was the power of creation, of balance. It was a power to heal. Yoruichi, he said, interrupting her review of the reports. I need to go somewhere. It'll take a day, maybe two. Yoruichi raised an eyebrow. A field trip. We're in the middle of your training. It's an old promise, Naruto said, his expression serious. Something I need to fix. Yoruichi studied his face for a long moment, then shrugged. Fine. A true master must also know when to follow his own convictions. Don't be late. He found Isaribi in a hidden cove, living as an outcast, feared by the local fishermen. She was more monster than woman now. Her skin covered in greenish scales, her hands webbed. She looked at him with the haunted eyes of a caged animal. Naruto, Uzumaki, she whispered, her voice raspy. I'm here to finish the job, Isaribi, he said gently. I'm sorry it took me so long. He asked her to sit at the water's edge. He placed his hands on her shoulders, not channeling the purifying fire he had used on Anko, but a different kind of energy. He closed his eyes and looked not at her body, but at the blueprint of her soul. He could see Amachi's work, a grotesque corruption of her spiritual matrix, a forced, unstable evolution. He began his work. This was not surgery, it was artistry. He used his Raryoku like a weaver's thread, finding the original, untainted pattern of her soul that still existed beneath the corruption. Carefully, he began to reinforce it, pouring his power into that original blueprint, making it the dominant reality. He was not destroying the mutation, he was reminding her very soul of what it was supposed to be. Isaribi cried out, not in pain, but in a wave of overwhelming sensation. She felt the monster within her receding, the alien biology dissolving as her own human DNA reasserted its dominance. The scales flaked away, the webbing between her fingers receded, her skin returned to its natural hue. When he was finished, she sat there, on the moonlit beach, completely and perfectly human. Tears streaming down her face. She had been given back her life, her humanity. She looked up at Naruto, her eyes filled with a worshipful, unwavering devotion. Her life was his. Upon his return, Naruto felt a new sensitivity to the spiritual world around him. As he meditated at the temple, he felt a faint, scattered whisper on the wind. It was a consciousness, fractured into a million tiny pieces. Like a reflection in a shattered mirror. It felt of sorrow, of loyalty, of rain, and of paper. Konan. He followed the spiritual trail. It led him back to Konoha, to a small, rain-swept shrine hidden in the woods, the place where she had made her final stand against Obito. Her physical body was long gone, absorbed by her final jutsu. But her will, her love for her friends, had been so strong that it had left an echo. A soul clinging to existence by the thinnest of threads. He knelt in the place where she had fallen. Konan, he whispered, you don't have to be scattered anymore. Let me give you a place to rest. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his soul. He projected his Raryoku as a vast, gentle net of light. He wasn't pulling the pieces. He was offering them a home, an anchor. He felt her fractured consciousness respond, drawn to the warmth and stability he offered. The million pieces of shattered light began to drift towards him. He focused, creating a core of pure, stable energy. He wove the pieces together around it, not forcing them, but allowing them to reform, to find their place in the whole. The light coalesced, taking on a familiar shape. Before him stood the form of Konan, the angel of the rain. She was not made of flesh, but of ethereal, semi-translucent paper that seemed to be crafted from moonlight and soul stuff. Her expression was serene, her amber eyes filled with a deep, melancholic wisdom. She looked at Naruto, and for the first time in a very long time, she smiled. She had been reborn, not as a tool of war, but as a guardian spirit. Finally free from the cycle of pain. She bowed her head to him, her loyalty, and the will of the original Akatsuki, now pledged to his cause. Naruto returned to the temple with a quiet heart. He had not sought out followers, but his compassion had earned him the unwavering loyalty of two powerful souls. Yoruichi watched him arrive, a look of profound approval on her face. "Power is more than just fighting, boy," she said softly. "It's about having something, and someone, to fight for. You're learning faster than I thought." As he prepared to resume his training, a sudden, chilling pressure descended upon Konoha. It was controlled, focused, and utterly malevolent. Far below them, the sky above the main gate of the village tore open. A new Garganta, a perfect, clean rip in the fabric of space, stabilized. A single figure stepped out, landing silently on the road. He was a tall, slender Arankar with slicked back green hair, cold, analytical eyes behind rectangular glasses, and the remnants of a jawbone mask on the left side of his face. He was dressed in a pristine white uniform, his demeanor that of a scholar, not a brute. He adjusted his glasses, his spiritual pressure flaring like a razor's edge. A clear announcement of his presence. His voice, amplified by spiritual power, was calm, clear, and carried across the entire village. "Naruto Uzumaki, vessel of Koryu, my creator, Lord Aizen, sends his regards. He has been observing your development with great interest. However, theory requires practical application." The Arankar slowly drew his Zanpakuto, its blade a pale, sickly green. "Consider this your final examination." Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Blade of Conviction. The Arankar's voice, amplified and unnaturally calm, was a scalpel dissecting the frantic peace of Konoha. On the streets, civilians who had survived Pain's assault and the Kyuubi's rampage felt a familiar, visceral terror. Shinobi, from Greenhorn Chunin to Grizzled Jonin, felt their blood run cold. The spiritual pressure emanating from this single being was a suffocating blanket of controlled, analytical malice, fundamentally different from the raw hunger of the Manos. It was the pressure of a predator that enjoyed its work. From her perch in the Hokage Tower, Tsunade stared through a long-range viewing scope, her knuckles white where she gripped the windowsill. "Evacuate the 5 southernmost districts," she roared at the Anbu commander beside her. "All non-combatants. I want a containment perimeter established, but no one, I repeat, no one, engages the thing without my direct command. Get me Hitsugaya and Matsumoto. Now." Far away, in the serene quiet of the hidden temple, the proclamation was just as clear. Yoruichi's lazy smile sharpened into a grin of anticipation. "Well, student, your final exam is here," she said, not a trace of concern in her voice. "The proctor seems quite confident. Don't disappoint me." Naruto was already moving. He needed no encouragement. This was not a test. It was an attack on his home. The quiet resolve he had cultivated in the forge solidified into a cold, hard diamond of conviction in his chest. Beside him, 2 figures materialized. Konan, a silent angel of ethereal paper. Her expression unreadable. Isaribi, her human form now radiating a faint aquatic aura, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective loyalty. "Konan, Isaribi," Naruto said, his voice calm and low. "Stay with me. Watch my lead." They nodded in unison and the 3 of them vanished, a blur of orange, blue, and white streaking towards the village. By the time Naruto arrived at the main gate, the Arankar had not moved. He stood patiently amidst the panicked exodus, observing the shinobi scrambling to form defensive lines with the detached air of a scientist watching ants in a jar. He was tall and slender, his pristine white hakama spotless. His slicked back green hair and rectangular glasses gave him the appearance of a scholar, an image only slightly marred by the jagged remnant of a hollow mask on his left jaw. "Ah," the Arankar said, his cold eyes focusing on Naruto as he landed 50 yards away. "The primary specimen arrives. Your spiritual signature is even more fascinating up close. A perfect, yet volatile, synthesis of corporeal and ethereal energies." I am Shielapuro Grants, 8th Espada in Lord Aizen's army, though my true title is head of the Research and Development Division. I don't care what you call yourself, Naruto replied, his voice level. You've made a mistake coming here. Shielapuro chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Mistake? No. This is a meticulously planned experiment. My hypothesis: that the vessel of Koryu, when placed under sufficient stress, will reveal the foundational principles of the Soul Forge. You are not an opponent. You are the key to a data set that will allow Lord Aizen to transcend the gods. He placed a hand on the hilt of his unique, ornate Zanpakuto. Now, shall we begin the data collection? He drew his blade and swallowed it. The action was so bizarre, so grotesque, that even the veteran shinobi faltered. Shielapuro's body began to contort and swell, his spiritual pressure skyrocketing. Sip, he whispered, his voice distorting, fornicaris. His body erupted in a grotesque transformation. Two large, wing-like appendages sprouted from his back, and his lower body became a mass of writhing tentacles. His fingers elongated, and from openings on his back, a thick, viscous liquid dripped onto the ground. Naruto's senses, honed in the forge, screamed at him. This was not a simple power-up. Every drop of that liquid was a spiritual poison, a biological weapon. Let the experiment commence, Shielapuro declared, and his speed was astonishing. He didn't use a flash step, he simply appeared in front of Naruto. One of his elongated fingers lancing forward like a spear. Naruto moved, his new Shunshin Ryu style carrying him sideways in a blur of unpredictable motion. But the Arankar was fast. The fingertip grazed Naruto's arm, leaving a small, bleeding cut. It was a negligible wound, but Shielapuro smiled. Excellent, the Espada murmured. Data sample acquired. From one of the wing-like appendages on his back, a sac swelled and burst, spilling a dollop of purple liquid onto the ground. The liquid bubbled and frothed, rapidly taking on a familiar shape. It solidified into a perfect, mindless puppet of Naruto Uzumaki. A crude but effective application of my Gabriel ability, Shielapuro explained with academic pride. It allows me to impregnate a host and create a perfect replica. A single drop of your blood was more than enough to extrapolate the necessary information. The Naruto puppet's eyes opened, blank and white. It formed a Rasengan in its palm and charged. This was the test. A battle against his own past. He saw the puppet's sloppy form, its reliance on raw power, the very things Yoruichi had beaten out of him. He met the charge not with a jutsu of his own, but with pure Hakuda. He sidestepped the Rasengan, the sphere grazing his jacket, and drove the heel of his palm into the puppet's neck. He followed with a precise, lightning-fast strike to its solar plexus and a sweeping kick to its knee. The puppet collapsed, dissolving back into a useless puddle of purple goo. He had dismantled his old self in 3 seconds without breaking a sweat. But Shielapuro was already creating more. 2, 4, then 8 Naruto puppets rose from the ground. A fascinating fighting style, the Espada commented clinically. But let us see how it fares against overwhelming numbers. Before the puppets could attack, a rain of hardened paper needles, each as deadly as a senbon, peppered the ground around them. Konan had taken to the sky, her ethereal form a silent, avenging angel against the darkening clouds. Naruto, her voice echoed in his mind, a calm link between their souls, his main body as the source. The puppets are a distraction. I know, he sent back. Keep him contained. Don't let him get near the evacuation routes. Understood. At the same time, the battle on the ground erupted. Shielapuro, with a wave of his hand, tore open several smaller, crude gargantas. From them poured dozens of lesser hollows, beasts of various shapes and sizes, that immediately charged towards the shinobi defensive lines. Chaos erupted, but Konoha's shinobi were not without their own wild cards. From the shadows of a destroyed storefront, a figure shot out, a blur of purple and brown. Enko Mitarashi, a feral grin on her face, met the first wave of hollows head-on. She moved like a viper, her twin kunai flashing, her taijutsu a whirlwind of deadly efficiency. The cursed seal on her neck was quiet, and all the ferocious energy she once used contain it was now unleashed upon her foes. She was a woman unchained, a whirlwind of contained chaos. From the rooftops, Isaribi channeled her power. Massive waves of water, pulled from the very air and underground aqueducts, rose up to form churning barriers, blocking the hollows, advance into the civilian sectors. Hitsugaya and Rangaku arrived at the main defensive line, their presence an immediate anchor for the terrified shinobi. All squads, form ranks. Hitsugaya's voice cut through the noise. These are hollows. Aim for the masks. Do not let them scatter. Rangaku released Hineka, cloud of ash sweeping through the streets, not as a single attack, but as a vast, impassable wall of 1,000 cutting edges, hurting the hollows and protecting the shinobi's flanks. It was a masterful display of battlefield control. Naruto saw it all in a glance. His friends, his allies, were holding the line. They were trusting him to cut off the head of the snake. He turned his full attention back to Shieloporo. Conan's power was immense. She had become one with the sky, vast sheets of paper descending to form a swirling, inescapable cage around the training ground, cutting the Espada off. A noble effort, Shieloporo noted, unfazed. But you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of my research. His wings pulsed, and this time, the puppets he created were not of Naruto. They air-twisted mockeries of his past opponents. A hulking, four-armed puppet that resembled Kimimaro, a live puppet with needle-like projectiles like Haku. I have data on many fascinating subjects. Let's test your adaptability. The specialized puppets charged. Naruto was now facing a multi-pronged assault, each opponent with a different, deadly skill set. He needed more than just a single blade. He manifested a simple Asachi in his hand. Bankai, he whispered, a word he had never spoken, a concept Koryu had taught him. But it was not his Bankai. It was a principle, Senbon Sakura Kujiyoshi. The blade in his hand did not change. Instead, he dropped it, and as it touched the ground, it dissolved into the earth like water. A second later, the ground around him erupted with 1,000 massive, newly formed blades. And then, all at once, they shattered. A swirling, chaotic vortex of over 100 million tiny, razor-sharp blades, each one glittering like a cherry blossom petal in the dying light, surrounded Naruto. It was an absolute defense, a perfect storm of steel. The incoming puppets charged into the vortex and were flayed into nothingness in an instant. Shieloporo's Analytica, eyes widened slightly behind his glasses. Impossible, he breathed, to replicate another's Zanpakuto ability. The data is beautiful. But Naruto was no longer on the defensive. He was the eye of the storm. He saw his opening. The vortex of blades swirled faster, converging on Shieloporo, forcing the Espada to create a defensive shell with his tentacles. In that split second, Naruto moved. He allowed the storm of petals to dissipate, their purpose served. In his hand, he manifested a new concept. It was raw, unbridled, overwhelming force. A blade that existed only to cut, to sever, to end. A massive, black, cleaver-like greatsword took shape in his grip, almost as tall as he was. It had no guard, only a hilt wrapped in white cloth. It radiated an aura of pure, uncompromising power. It was the echo of a soul that had always pushed forward, Zangetsu. He used Shunshin Ryu, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground as he crossed the distance between them in a single, untraceable heartbeat. His movement was too fast, too erratic, too utterly alien for even Shieloporo's analytical mind to process. The Espada's eyes widened in genuine shock. The boy was gone from one spot and was already upon him. The massive black blade raised high. Naruto brought the sword down. The strike was clean. There was no resistance. The greatsword passed through Shieloporo's torso, its immense spiritual weight overwhelming any hierro or regenerative ability the Espada possessed. A thin, dark line appeared across Shieloporo's chest. He looked down at the wound, then up at Naruto, a look of profound scientific curiosity on his face even as his body began to fail him. He had been utterly and completely defeated. High above, in the Hokage Tower, Tsunade lowered her scope, her breath caught in her throat. She had watched the entire battle unfold. She had seen the initial struggle, the calm delegation of authority, the impossible manifestation of the blade storm, and the final, devastatingly powerful strike. This was not the boy she had known. This was a warrior king, a leader, a being of immense power tempered by an even greater control. Her heart swelled with a dizzying, terrifying mix of a mentor's pride, a leader's awe, and a woman's admiration for the incredible man he had become right before her eyes. On the battlefield, Shieloporo's body began to dissolve into dust. A final, clinical smirk touched his lips. Incredible. Data, he rasped, his voice fading. Lord Aizen will be so very pleased. He coughed, a cloud of spiritual particles escaping his mouth. He is not just coming for your power. Vessel, a single soul, no matter how strong, is finite. He is coming for the forge itself. The power to create Zanpakuto, to arm an infinite army with them. The power to create souls from nothing. His eyes met Naruto's, a final, chilling revelation in their depths. This world, your precious home, will be his nursery. With those final words, the eighth Espada dissolved into nothing. The lesser hollows, their master gone, shrieked and were quickly dispatched by the Konoha shinobi. The Garganta sealed itself shut, leaving behind a darkening, storm-racked sky. Silence fell over the devastated southern district. Naruto stood alone in the center of a crater, the massive black blade in his hand dissolving into particles of light. The test was over. The war had just been declared. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Council of Worlds. The rain began an hour after the battle, a cold, persistent drizzle that washed the dust and blood from the streets of the Sioux Thurn district but did nothing to cleanse the palpable fear from the air. Cleanup crews in Anbu gear moved with grim efficiency, erecting privacy screens and barriers around the devastated area. Konoha was no stranger to destruction. But this was different. This was not the rage of a tailed beast or the god complex of a fellow shinobi. This was an alien invasion, a violation of reality itself, and the entire village felt the psychic wound. In the Hokage's office, the air was thick with the scent of old paper, ozone, and brewing tension. Tsunade stood before a massive map of the elemental nations, her arms crossed. Her expression grim. The reports of the battle were laid out on her desk. Eyewitness accounts, damage assessments, a preliminary analysis of the Arankar's energy signature from the sensor core. It all painted a picture of a foe so far beyond their current understanding that it made the looming threat of the Akatsuki seem almost manageable by comparison. It's a declaration of war, Shizune, Tsunade said. Her voice low. Not just on Konoha, but on our entire world. Aizen doesn't want to conquer us. He wants to use us as a resource, a farm. What are you going to do? Shizune asked, her hands clutching Taunton. The small pig sensing her distress. Something I should have done years ago, Tsunade replied, turning from the map. I'm ending the era of distrust. I'm calling a 5-cage summit. Here, now. The command was an earth-shattering political gamble. Summoning the other cage was not a request. It was a demand, a power play that could easily be interpreted as a Konoha attempt to assert dominance. But these were desperate times. Hours later, in a secluded corner of the village archives, Hitsugaya stood with a single, black butterfly perched on his finger. He spoke in a low, formal tone, relaying every detail of the battle, of Naruto's power, of Aizen's stated goal, into the psychic link of the hell butterfly. When he was finished, the creature gave a sigh. Flutter of its skull-patterned wings and dissolved, a messenger sent across dimensions. The die was cast on 2 fronts. They arrived within a day, their speed a testament to the gravity of Tsunade's summons. First came Gaara of the Sand, the cage, his arrival as quiet and subtle as the desert wind, his expression calm but his eyes filled with concern for his friend. Then Maid Terumi, the Mizukage, a woman of grace and charm whose smile did little to hide the razor-sharp intellect behind it. The final 2 arrived together in a clash of personalities. The fourth Raikage, a mountain of muscle and righteous anger, appeared in a crackle of lightning, his sheer presence making the air vibrate. With him, floating on a small platform of earth, was Onoki, the elderly and diminutive third Tsuchikage. His back bent with age but his eyes sharp with the cynical wisdom of a lifelong political player. Tsunade. This had better be worth pulling me away from my village. The Raikage boomed, his voice shaking the windows of the reception hall. HMPH. Dragging us all the way to the leaf on a moment's notice, Onoki grumbled. Smacks of arrogance, if you ask me. They were led not to the usual council chamber, but to the Hokage's office, which had been transformed. Her desk and personal effects were gone, replaced by a single, massive, circular table. In its center, 2 maps lay side by side. One was the familiar, detailed map of the elemental nations. The other was a new, strange geography of concentric circles and barren landscapes, hastily drawn from the descriptions provided by H. Itsugaya and Rangaku, a crude representation of the Seraite and the desolate sands of Hawako Mundo. The attendees were a tense, eclectic gathering of the most powerful people in the world. The 5 Kage and their chosen bodyguards. On Konoha's side, Tsunade sat at the head, flanked by Kakashi and her advisors, Homura and Kaharu. Against the wall, a silent, intimidating tableau stood in support of Naruto, Yoruichi, leaning casually. Her golden eyes missing nothing, Hitsugaya and Rangaku, formal and rigid in their Shinigami attire, Enko, her arms crossed, her feral energy a palpable threat, and Konan, a silent, ethereal figure of paper, her very presence an unnerving statement of power. And at the center of it all, sitting quietly at the table, was Naruto. He wore a simple black shirt and orange pants, no flak jacket, no headband. He looked not like a weapon, but like a statesman, his calm demeanor the most unsettling thing in the room to the visiting Kage. Tsunade began, her voice ringing with authority. She laid out the facts without embellishment. The appearance of the Hollows, the arrival of the Shinigami, the battle with the Arankar Shielaporo Grants, and his final, chilling message. She spoke of a new enemy, Sosuke Aizen, and his goal of harvesting their world. The reaction was, predictably, explosive. Absurd. The Raikage slammed a meaty fist on the table, cracking the wood. Other worlds. Soul Reapers. This sounds like a genjutsu, a trick to consolidate power for Konoha. Indeed, Onoki added, stroking his beard. A convenient, invisible enemy that only the leaf seems to have the means to fight. How very fortunate for you, Tsunade. Mei Terumi was more measured. While the story is fantastic, she said, her voice a silken purr, the destruction in your southern district is very real. You say these beings are immune to conventional ninjutsu. Captain Hitsugaya, can you elaborate? All eyes turned to the Shinigami. Hitsugaya stood, his expression grim. A hollow is a corrupted soul. Chakra is a physical energy. Attacking a spiritual being with physical force is like trying to cut a ghost with a regular sword. It is only because your chakra is derived from spiritual energy that it has any effect at all, but it is inefficient. To defeat them, you must destroy the soul itself. His explanation was met with skeptical silence. It was a paradigm shift too massive, too sudden for them to accept. This was their world, their power. To be told it was suddenly inadequate was an insult. The burden of proof was too great, the story too unbelievable. All eyes, inevitably, turned to Naruto. He did not rise. He did not shout. He simply met the gaze of each Kage, his own eyes filled with a profound and heavy calm. Raikage Dono, he began, his voice even and respectful. You are the fastest shinobi alive. The man I fought yesterday used a technique called Sonido. He moved in a way I can only describe as a localized warp of space. He was as fast as you are, perhaps faster. Our speed is no longer the ultimate advantage. He turned to Onoki. Tsuchikage Dono, your dust release is the ultimate destructive jutsu, erasing all it touches. But the Arankar I fought could create perfect living puppets from a single drop of blood. Aizen's army is not one of quality, but of infinite quantity. You cannot erase an army that can be regrown from nothing. He looked at Mei. Mizukage Dono, you have worked tirelessly to bring stability and transparency to your village after the reign of the Blood Mist. Aizen is a master of psychological warfare and perfect illusion. He thrives on distrust. He would turn your own shinobi against you without them ever realizing they were being controlled. Finally, he looked at his friend. Gaara, you know what it's like to have a monster inside you. To be feared and misunderstood. Aizen seeks to turn our entire world into that kind of monster. He had spoken to each of them in their own language, of power, of tactics, of politics. He had shown that he understood them. This isn't about Konoha, Naruto continued, his voice resonating with quiet conviction. This is about survival. Our infighting, our borders, our ancient rivalries, they are a luxury we can no longer afford. We need a permanent shinobi alliance, a united front to defend this world as one. He then turned to his own allies, demonstrating a new kind of leadership. Yoruichi-san, what do we know of Aizen's methods for crossing worlds? Hitsugaya Taicho, Based on your experience, what is the first tactical objective Aizen would seek to secure? Rangaku-san, you mentioned political factions in the Soul Society. Who are they? Who can we trust? He fielded their expertise, weaving their knowledge into a larger strategic tapestry right before the cage's eyes. He proposed the creation of a new, joint research and development division to study spiritual energy, to find ways to infuse their jutsu with the properties needed to harm spiritual beings. He wasn't just a warrior. He was a commander-in-chief. Still, the Raikage was unconvinced. Words, strategy, it means nothing without proof. Show us this new power that makes you believe you can lead us. Naruto nodded slowly. He held up his hand over the table. A simple, unadorned Asachi materialized in a soft glow of blue light. The cage tensed, but he made no move to attack. Instead, he reached into a pouch and produced a small, heavily sealed scroll. This is a storage scroll with a 5-element unsealing jutsu on it, he explained. It requires 5 jonin of different chakra natures to open simultaneously. A pinnacle of fuinjutsu. He laid the scroll on the table. He then manifested a new blade in his other hand. It was a strange weapon, a short, almost surgical-looking scalpel made of rippling, distorted light. This blade, Naruto said, is the concept of disassociation. It doesn't cut matter, it severs connections. He lightly touched the tip of the ethereal scalpel to the scroll. He didn't cut it, he just tapped it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the complex ink runes of the sealing formula glowed brightly and simply fell apart. The connections between the symbols were broken. The jutsu was rendered inert. The scroll popped open with a soft puff of smoke. The silence in the room was absolute. That was a power beyond their comprehension. It wasn't about destruction. It was about rewriting the rules of their world on a fundamental level. An F-rank jutsu could now undo an S-rank seal. Onoki's jaw was slack. The Raikage's eyes were wide, the cations of such a power running wild in his mind. Gaara was the first to speak, his voice quiet but firm. Suna will stand with Konoha. We will stand with Naruto. Mei Terumi smiled, a genuine expression this time. A man who thinks that far ahead is someone worth following. Kiri is with you, Naruto-kun. The Raikage and Onoki exchanged a long look. Their skepticism had been surgically removed. They were old soldiers, and they knew a paradigm shift in warfare when they saw one. With a heavy sigh, Onoki nodded. The stone will not stand alone against the end of the world. The Raikage grunted his assent, a gesture more powerful than any speech. The Shinobi Alliance, a true and permanent one, was born in that moment. Just as the historic agreement was reached, the air in the room grew cold. A single, black butterfly with delicate, skull-like patterns on its wings fluttered through the reinforced stone wall of the office as if it were mist. It circled the great table once, a silent, otherworldly messenger. Before landing gently on the back of Hitsugaya's outstretched hand, the captain stood, his eyes closed for a moment as he received the psychic message. The other cage watched, mesmerized and unnerved by this quiet display of an alien communication. When he was done, Hitsugaya's face was grim, his posture ramrod straight. He turned to the assembly, but his gaze was fixed on Naruto. A message from the captain commander of the Gotei 13, Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto, Hitsugaya announced, his voice formal and loud in the silent room. He has received and acknowledged my full report on the activities of Sosuke Aizen's remnants and the existence of this world, the elemental nations. He paused, letting the significance of the words sink in. The leader of this entire other world of souls was acknowledging them. He requests the presence of Naruto Uzumaki in the Seraite, Hitsugaya declared, his voice resonating with the weight of the summons. Not as a subject of investigation, but as an ambassador for this world, to discuss the terms of a formal, two-world military alliance against a common foe. A stunned silence fell over the most powerful leaders in the elemental nations. The game had just been elevated to a level beyond their wildest imaginings. Naruto Uzumaki, the outcast orphan, the knuckle-headed ninja, was now being summoned to the court of the gods, not as a subject, but as an equal. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Walking into the lion's den. The agreement in the Hokage's office was not a victory, but a ceasefire in the face of annihilation. The 5 cage, Their ancient rivalries and deep-seated distrust momentarily shelved, began the arduous process of weaving together the foundations of their new shinobi alliance. It was decided that Naruto, as the catalyst and central figure of this new era, would be the one to answer the Soul Society's summons. Yoruichi would act as his guide and political advisor, her knowledge of the Seraite's treacherous social landscape indispensable. Rangaku would serve as the official Gote 13 escort, her presence lending legitimacy to their arrival. Hitsugaya, to his quiet frustration, was deemed more valuable in Konoha. Acting as the primary liaison to the cage, his cold, logical mind perfect for the task of integrating their world's military strategies. The departure was quiet, held in the pre-dawn chill of the following day. As Naruto stood before the shimmering, unstable gateway Yoruichi was preparing to open, Tsunade approached him. There were no grand speeches, no tearful farewells. She simply adjusted the collar of his jacket, her touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The last time a shinobi from the Leaf willingly walked into the center of an unknown enemy's power, it was your father, she said. Her voice low and rough with emotion. He saved the village. The stakes are higher now. You're carrying the weight of the entire world on your shoulders. I'm not alone this time, Naruto replied, his gaze steady. Tsunade looked past him at Yoruichi, at Rangaku, at the memory of Konan and Anko and the others who now stood with him. She saw the truth in his words. A small, sad smile touched her lips. No, you're not. She took a step back, her expression hardening back into the mask of the Godime Hokage. Come back alive, Naruto. That's an order. Yes, Grandma Tsunade, he said. The old nickname a small token of the bond that transcended their new, world-shaking roles. Let's go, kid, Yoruichi said, gesturing to the shimmering gate. The lions are waiting. The journey through the Dongai, the precipice world, was a disorienting nightmare. It was a corridor of screaming, soul-tearing currents, a place where time and space were fluid and hostile. Without Yoruichi's expert guidance, they would have been torn apart and lost forever. They emerged, stumbling, not into a pristine courtyard, but into a sprawling, chaotic city. Welcome to the Rukongai, Yoruichi announced, dusting herself off. District 78, Anabahara, the Soul Society's majestic slums. The sight was overwhelming, an endless sea of souls, millions of them, crowded into rickety wooden houses and dusty, unpaved streets. The air was thick with the smells of cooking fires, unwashed bodies, and a pervasive, low-grade despair. This was the afterlife for the common soul, a place of stagnation and survival. Naruto, who had grown up an outcast, felt a familiar pang of empathy for the listless, hollow-eyed residents who stared at their strange, well-fed forms. It was a stark, immediate lesson in the Soul Society's rigid hierarchy. Their passage to the gates of the Seraite, the court of pure souls, only amplified the contrast. The city of the Shinigami was a fortress of impossible scale, its walls a-gleaming. Pure white stone that seemed to repel the grime of the Rukongai. As the massive gate, guarded by a towering, stoic giant, was opened for them, the very atmosphere changed. The air inside was crisp, clean, and heavy with a spiritual pressure so immense it was like walking into the deep ocean. It was a constant, crushing assertion of power, designed to intimidate and awe any who entered. Patrols of black-clad Shinigami moved with silent, disciplined grace, their eyes cold and suspicious as they took in Naruto's bright orange jacket and the foreign, vibrant energy he radiated. He was a splash of chaotic color in a world of stark black and white, and he felt the weight of 1,000 years of xenophobic tradition settle upon him. They were led through echoing courtyards and past T-owering barracks to the headquarters of the 1st Division. There, in a large, austere hall, the captains of the Gote 13 were assembled. 13 beings of immense power stood in a line, their combined spiritual pressure a palpable wall. Naruto felt it not as an attack, but as a judgment. It was the collective weight of an ancient, proud, and powerful institution, and he was the anomaly they had gathered to dissect. At the center stood the captain commander, Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto, an ancient man whose frail appearance was a complete betrayal of the sun-like power Naruto could feel radiating from him. To his sides, the others stood, a rogues gallery of power and personality. A brutish, grinning giant with bells in his hair, Kenpachi Zaraki, leered at him, his energy a jagged blade of pure, unrestrained bloodlust. A serene, beautiful woman with a long braid, Retsuyu no Hana, offered a calm smile, but her eyes held an ancient, terrifying depth. A cold, aloof nobleman, Byakuya Kuchiki, regarded him with undisguised disdain, as if Naruto were something unpleasant he had stepped in. A grotesque man in a captain's haori, Mayuri Kuretsuchi, eyed him with the twitching, obsessive glare of a vivisectionist who had just been handed a new, exotic species. So, Yamamoto's voice was like the crackle of old parchment and the roar of an inferno. He opened his ancient, slitted eyes. This is the boy who is the vessel of Koryu. Explain yourself, Naruto Uzumaki. Explain your world. Guided by a subtle nudge from Yoruichi, Naruto stepped forward. He did not bow. He stood as an equal. With the same direct, unwavering calm he had shown the cage, he spoke of the elemental nations, of chakra, of the will to protect one's home. He spoke not as a subordinate begging for aid, but as the representative of a sovereign power, proposing an alliance against a mutual enemy. He had barely finished when a guttural, joyous laugh echoed through the hall. Enough talk. Kenpachi Zaraki roared, taking a step forward, his spiritual pressure flaring like a physical blow. Words are for the weak. If this kid's as strong as they say, then let's see it. I want to fight him. Right here, right now. Control yourself, Zaraki, Byakuya Kuchiki said, his voice dripping with aristocratic condescension. Such a vulgar display is beneath our station. This, Ryoka, is an unstable element. He should be contained, not indulged. Oh my, a lazy, amused voice drawled. Captain Shunsui Kiyaraku, a man in a pink, flowered haori, tipped his straw hat. Quite the predicament. We can't very well forge an alliance with someone whose strength we can't properly gauge, can we? A demonstration seems to be in order. A controlled spar, perhaps. The suggestion hung in the air. Kenpachi's grin widened. I volunteer. Unacceptable, Byakuya stated flatly. If this rabble must be tested, then it should be done with discipline and precision, not with the mindless flailing of a beast. He too stepped forward. I will discipline him. Yamamoto stroked his long, white beard, his eyes appraising Naruto. Very well, the commander's voice boomed, silencing all dissent. A trial by combat. Naruto Uzumaki. You will. Face Captain Zaraki and Captain Kuchiki simultaneously. We shall adjourn to Sokyoku Hill. Prove your worth. The execution ground was a vast, flat plateau, dominated by the massive, two-pronged execution stand. The other captains arranged themselves as spectators. Rangaku stood beside a worried-looking Yukitake, while Yoruichi leaned against the scaffold, a confident smirk on her face. Naruto stood in the center, facing his two opponents. On his left, Kenpachi Zaraki, a monster of raw power, drew his chipped and worn Nodashi, a manic, joyous laugh bubbling from his chest. On his right, Byakuya Kuchiki, the pinnacle of Shinigami art and noble pride, held his sword before him, his expression cold as ice. Scatter, Byakuya incanted, his voice barely a whisper. Senbon Sakura, his blade dissolved into a swirling storm of 100 million tiny, razor-sharp fragments, glittering like deadly cherry blossoms as they surged towards Naruto from all sides. At the exact same moment, Kenpachi charged, his raw speed astonishing. His blade raised for a single, mountain-cleaving blow. It was an inescapable, two-pronged assault of overwhelming numbers and overwhelming force. Naruto did not move to evade. He simply raised a hand. A new weapon materialized. Not a sword, but a simple, unadorned tuning fork made of dark, humming metal. The concept of resonance. He flicked it with his thumb. A single, pure, impossibly high-pitched note rang out, inaudible to most but felt as a deep vibration in the soul. He stabbed the vibrating fork into the ground. A wave of pure, harmonic energy pulsed outwards. The millions of Senbon Sakura's petals, each a tiny, independent spiritual construct, were hit by the disruptive frequency. Their cohesion shattered. The beautiful, deadly storm dissolved into a harmless shower of glittering reishi particles that rained down on the stunned Byakuya. Having nullified one threat, Naruto turned to the other. Kenpachi was almost upon him, his massive blade descending. Naruto didn't manifest a sword to block. Instead, his hands and feet became encased in gleaming, azure-white gauntlets and greaves. The concept of impact redirection. He didn't block Kenpachi's strike. He caught it. His gauntlet-clad hand met the flat of Kenpachi's blade. The impact was immense, cracking the very ground beneath them. But instead of being crushed, Naruto's gauntlets glowed. He absorbed the entirety of the kinetic force of Kenpachi's blow, spun with the momentum, and redirected it. With a grunt of effort, he flung the massive, off-balance captain through the air, sending tumbling directly towards the still-shocked Byakuya Kuchiki. The two captains collided in a tangle of limbs and aristocratic outrage. The entire exchange had taken less than 10 seconds. Naruto had not landed a single blow. He had simply, and perfectly, neutralized the signature abilities of two of the most powerful captains in the Gote 13. Kenpachi roared, scrambling to his feet, his eyes burning with a furious, ecstatic light. Byakuya was silent, his pride wounded more deeply than any blade could ever cut. They charged again, this time with a semblance of coordination. The spar that followed was a masterclass in control. Naruto flowed between them, his Shunshin Ryu a dance of unpredictable motion. He never used the same concept twice. Against Byakuya's Kido, he manifested a blade of pure nothingness that erased the spells from existence. Against Kenpachi's overwhelming spiritual pressure, he created a simple cloak of energy that harmonized with it, rendering the crushing aura inert. He was not overpowering them. He was teaching them a new language of power, and proving, with every move, that he was its sole, fluent speaker. He ended the fight by manifesting two swords made of heavy, gravitic energy. Using them to pin his opponent's blades to the ground, leaving them both momentarily disarmed and utterly defeated. He stood over them, breathing calmly, not a scratch on him. As this demonstration sufficient, they returned to the First Division barracks in a heavy, awed silence. Kenpachi was fuming, but a new, grudging respect burned in his eyes. Byakuya was a statue of wounded pride. The other captains looked at Naruto now not as an anomaly, but as a being of truly transcendent power. Unohana's serene smile was genuine, filled with a deep, profound understanding. Shish. He had witnessed the soul of the forge at work. Captain Commander Yamamoto stood, his ancient eyes open and blazing with a new light. He slammed the butt of his cane sword on the floor, the sound echoing with finality. "Your power is undeniable," Yamamoto declared, his voice a rumbling proclamation. "Your character, resolute. The Gote 13 accepts your proposal. The alliance between our worlds is forged." At the exact moment the words were spoken, a series of violent, rolling explosions rocked the Seraite from the direction of the Rukongai gates. The entire fortress shuddered. Red lights flash. Across the ceiling of the barracks as a shrill, piercing alarm began to shriek, the siren for a full-scale invasion. "Report," Yamamoto roared. "The Rukongai is under attack." An officer screamed, bursting into the hall. Multiple Gargantas, an army of hollows and Arankar are pouring through. Simultaneously, a frantic hell butterfly burst into existence before Rangaku, its wings beating erratically. It pulsed with a desperate, panicked message from the world of the living. Rangaku's face went pale, her eyes wide with horror. "Commander," she gasped, her voice trembling. "A message from Captain Hitsugaya in the Elemental Nations." Quote. She looked from Yamamoto to Naruto, her expression one of dawning, absolute terror. "Konoha is also under attack. It's a coordinated, two-world invasion." Chapter 8 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.